So my name is Paul, and I've been teaching English for quite a long time. And my aim here this evening is to help you get through your preparation for your paper one and to certainly get that started. I notice a lot of people asking how long is the class. Now, of course, you're more than welcome to stay on the class for as long as you want. You don't have to stay on for the full 3 hours. We're providing this to you for free. But it is a 3 hour class. Now, there'll be a break at 5 to, well, now it'll be at 25 past 7 and a break at 25 past 8 as well for 10 minutes. I'll take a break, get a bit of fresh air. You might go and get a cup of tea. And that's when I'll have a look at the stream and see if there's any questions. Yeah, it's all working well now, it looks like. That's fine. Brilliant. So we're going to get straight away into the work. I'm not going to waffle because we have loads of work to do. But just to say, we have 3 hours this evening, and I will be going for the full 3 hours with those 2 breaks. I welcome any and all questions through the chat that I can answer, but I won't answer them until I get to the last half hour of the class, when I'll go through the chat and see if. So I'd ask you to hold them until we get to that stage, and that's when I'll do a little Q&A session. Don't forget as well that tomorrow morning we're on for paper 2. So this is paper 1 this evening, and it's paper 2 tomorrow morning. So again, tomorrow from 9:30 to 12:30. And what I'll do then is, again, when I finish at 12:30 tomorrow, I'll stay on the call for as long as it takes to answer all the questions that you have. I want this to be of use to you. Now, just before I get going, what you can see in front of you is the platform. And I just want to point out that on the platform, because many of you will be new to Grinds 360, you might just be coming in for the free class having downloaded the app. So you have access to this platform for a limited time. And I just want to show you some of the things that are on the platform. So very quickly, when it comes to English, there is, it's probably not going to work now because so many people on the site. Yeah, okay, forget that. That was a bad idea, was it? Okay, I'll just go to work. I'll come back to that then later on. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to start by talking about the marking scheme. And I'm going to start by telling you that I've been doing these courses since the 90s. And I always start by saying that I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know. But I found over the years that students often, if I presume the students know things, they don't. That's often a mistake. So if I'm telling you things you already know tonight, hopefully it's reinforcing your learning. If I'm telling you things you don't already know, that's brilliant, because that's the whole point of being here. Now, no. There's no need to be. Well, Ruby, sorry, just said people can't hear me. No, I think that might be old. 1834. Sorry, just to say to the I'm going to continue now to the technical team, guys. I'm audible. You can hear me okay. Hopefully, just drop me a message, please, if you don't mind. Okay, so I'm going to get going. And I'm going to talk about the marking scheme for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to start looking at paper 1, breaking down paper 1, what to expect. Oh, you can hear me, Aaron. That's fantastic. Okay, super. Let's get going. So these are the mind maps. Now, some of these documents that we're going to look at tonight are available for you to look at, and they've been put up on the platform, and there's a link to them. Others there aren't. This one there isn't, because it's just a start off. I'm just introducing, okay? And then when we get into the paper 1 stuff proper, that's documents that are already posted on the platform. But I want to talk through this really, really quickly, because I think if you don't understand, look, when I'm correcting students' work, and when I'm correcting the leave insert on the odd occasion that I do correct it, it's often shocking to me to see that students haven't got a bloody clue what they're meant to be doing. And when I talk to students about why that is, they tell me it's because they haven't been told. So I always start these courses with taking that excuse away. After this, you're going to be told. So we all know the PCLM marking scheme, and we all know the breakdown of that PCLM marking scheme. Yeah, I think, Ruby, it might be at your end, because there's people are telling me they can hear me, okay? And we all know that P is the most important part of the marking scheme. And that the phrase that you'll probably hear your teachers using in school, I'm sure, is that P is the bar. Now, sorry. Use the pen. So when we get I'm going to be very blunt here. When we get down into why the vast majority of work produced by students is substandard, it's often because they don't understand that phrase, P is the bar. It means that in English, students often try to rote learn, or they try to write answers that are not relevant to the question under discussion. And I know that sounds obvious, but if you were to ask me the number one thing that would help you improve your grades in English, it's learning how to interpret a question and thinking before you start to write. If you don't, if your work is not purposeful, then your work is not going to score well. That's the marking scheme, the way it's set up, that the score that you receive for P cannot be exceeded by the score that you receive for C or L. So if you get a low P bar because you're not answering the question, or a low P score because you're not answering the question, that will then create a ceiling, which will mean that the subsequent marks that you receive for C and L cannot be in excess of the score you got for P. I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. So it's really important that we examine the keywords in every question and that all evidence and commentary are relevant to the question under discussion. Okay? Really, really, really important. There we go, Ruby. Yeah, the volume turned up. Fair play. We're only getting started here. Technical issues. It's okay. We all have them. Okay? Now, again, I know you know that already. I know you do. But I want you to bear it in mind by the time we get to the end of tomorrow's class at 12:30. Okay? That idea that students write, they look at the paper and they see white space and they feel terror. So they just start writing and they feel better as they fill up that space with ink. But often it comes to me then, or my colleagues, and we sit and we start reading your work and we're reading it saying, okay, this student has written loads, but it has nothing to do with the question, or it has a tenuous relationship with the question, or I can see that they're trying to be on the question, but they're not succeeding. And that's where students fall down. And why does that happen? Happens because there's not enough practice done, but I'm not going to lecture you on that today. So we'll talk about narration and paraphrasing in a moment. We'll talk about what that means when I get through and start looking at particular questions. But one of the big issues that students have is they start telling the story rather than analysing the material in relation to the question. So for example, many of you might be studying King Lear as your single text. And if you're asked a question, for example, on the character of, I don't know, Edmund and Edgar and their role in the play, narrating means telling me what happens to Edmund and telling me what happens to Edgar. That's narration or paraphrasing. The question will never ask you to tell the story. The question will ask you to demonstrate knowledge and interpret that knowledge in the light of the specifics of the question. So if it's what role they play, what's their importance to the drama, or as was asked in the previous year, what would happen if you removed those characters from the play, how would it impact upon the play? That is requiring you to do what is called critical thinking and analysis. And the vast majority of candidates don't want to do it. I saw somebody put on the stream earlier on that they thought English wasn't a very good subject. That's okay. For me, I think it's a magnificent subject because I'm interested in the stuff, but also because it encourages students, in order to be successful, to think critically. And that means to ask themselves why the material I know, or how the material I know, is relevant to the particulars of the question I'm answering. And again, to go back, this is the fundamentals. Every time I sit down to read your work, every time an examiner sits down to read your work, they are asking, how high can I give the P mark? And if the student is just narrating or paraphrasing, and if the student is just filling ink on paper and is not actually answering the specifics of the question, then their P bar is low, and that's why they're getting 5s and 6s, or maybe getting 4s when they should be getting 3s, or getting 3s when they should be getting 2s. It is the number one issue. I'm just looking at that now. Now, I'm going to come to that now, coherence of delivery in a moment, okay? So we're looking for analytical writing, and we're looking for critical thinking. And again, these are things I'm going to show you over the course of the next 6 hours. Now, there's an example of a question from a previous year. It was asked on Macbeth. Discuss how Shakespeare's use of language, including imagery, plays an important part in developing our understanding of the following aspects of his play. I imagine it was King Lear: characterization, setting, and atmosphere. Now, that question, it doesn't matter how well you know King Lear or The Crucible or whatever your single text is. You have to demonstrate knowledge of the text, knowledge of Shakespeare's use of language in that particular case, or the writer's use of language, but you then have to explain how that language plays an important part in developing our understanding of, in this case, I would have gone for a character. So if at the beginning of King Lear, Lear says, come not between the dragon and his wrath when he's threatening Kent, that's clearly a very, very powerful use of imagery. But the question is not asking you to tell me that. The question is asking you, what does that image and the fact that Shakespeare puts those words in Lear's mouth, what do they tell us about Lear? So the candidate who does well interprets, thinks critically, breathes, takes the time to figure out why that quote is relevant to the question and explain why. The candidate who doesn't do well just writes down loads of the story. So that's what purpose means. Now, a moment ago, somebody put in the stream the question about coherence. Is the marking scheme based on how cohesive the answer is to the question? The second part of the marking scheme is C, coherence of delivery. So to answer your question, John, yes, it's very, very, very important. So the first thing I'm looking for is your work purposeful? Are you answering the question, or are you just putting ink on paper? And the second thing I'm asking, once I've established that you're doing well in terms of your purpose, is the work coherent? That means, does it have a clear BME? So one of the questions I'm always asked is, does how you open matter? Yes, it does. Does how you conclude matter? Yeah, it does. What about your paragraphing technique? Most students don't have, if I say those words in class, I often get a laughing reaction. Paragraphing technique, Paul, what the hell are you talking about? If I write 10 lines and then skip a line or I indent. So you can see why English is a subject that statistically, the lowest amount of H3, 2 and 1 scores in any subject, that's English. If you take away the last couple of years where there have been there's been grade inflation, about 2% of students who sit the Leaving Cert every year get a H1 in English. Okay? About 8%, maybe 9% on a good year, get a combined H1, H2. And then around 30% get a combined H1, H2 or H3. So all of this. So what does that mean? Well, it means statistically speaking that 7 out of 10 students who sit the Leaving Cert next year, well, yeah, it is still next year, we're New Year's Eve in a couple of days, but 7 out of every 10 students will get a H4 or below. And I passionately believe that that's not necessary. And I think if you just listen to what you're being told in terms of the marking scheme, making sure your work is purposeful, making sure your work is organized, making sure you introduce properly, you conclude properly, that you have links between your paragraphs and you work on your paragraphing skills and your work has a clear structure, that's how we succeed. I used to work in Leeson Street in the Institute of Education for many, many, many years. And when I was doing these courses in person and students would walk in, I'd ask them, is there any, did you notice any fairy dust being sprinkled on you when you walk through the door? Because I always felt that students felt, well, all I have to do is I'll just go and do the crash course. And I'll be grand then. And of course, that's bullshit. You have to take stock of how you approach your work. You've now got 5 months to your Leaving Cert. Am I wrong? I think I might be right. January, February, March, April, May. Bang. That's the Leaving Cert. Everybody can improve in English. It is my firm belief, if you start working, you can improve by at least a grade. But now's the time to start. And now's the time to realise, what am I doing wrong? I'm not carefully analysing the question enough, and therefore I'm often waffling and I'm not on task. I don't plan, and I lie to myself and I make the excuse, I don't have time to plan. Bullshit. Or, Paul, I really struggle with time management. Now, that one's a real one. But how can you get better at that? We'll talk about time management now in a second. How can we get better at that? By having a structure, by planning. Ironically, taking the time to think about what you're going to say before you say it means that when you start writing, you go faster and the work tends to flow. And if it flows, that means that the third aspect of the language, of the marking scheme, which is language use, tends to improve. Most of the time, Most of the time when students are writing, I want you to imagine talking to somebody about something that you know a lot about, whatever it is that you're into. Talking to a friend. The conversation flows. You never feel that you run out of things to say because you're confident. Most of the time when people are writing in English, they're not confident because they either haven't done the work or the work hasn't been done properly with them. Now we're going to talk about paper 2 tomorrow and we'll get into all of that in terms of paper 2. But so they're writing about, for example, a poet's work and they've read the poet in class, but they didn't really fundamentally understand the poet. And therefore, when they start writing about that poet, they're nervous. And when they're nervous, their writing is not as good. They struggle to articulate themselves with clarity. Now, the student who takes the time, and we'll see all this tomorrow, to look at past poetry questions and understands what way poetry questions are structured and put together so that they know what they're writing is purposeful. And then the student who's thought about, they're not going for a H1, but they've thought about I was taught this in primary school, Paul, introduce, develop and conclude and support everything I'm saying with reference, with evidence. Well, once you get into doing that, then your confidence begins to grow. And then those issues that you have with expression, that struggle that you have with articulation, which it comes about through, I'm not being patronizing. People don't read enough anymore. If I was to give you one piece of advice to improve between now and your Leaving Cert, besides understanding the marking scheme, it would be to sit down and read what used to be called a newspaper or good journalism once a week, every week between now and the Leaving Cert. Not studying it, just reading it. And if you do, you're exposing yourself to language, you're exposing yourself to argument, to interesting introductions, to interesting conclusions. You're giving yourself an experience where you are looking at a professional writer and you're not trying to be like that professional writer, but the simple action of reading that person's work has an effect on the way you write. Now, again, you might tell me, bullshit, Paul, you're talking through your ear. I've been doing this for a long time and I know it works. You have to know the marking scheme. You have to analyse the question carefully. You have to plan and structure your work. And the only way the language can improve, is if you're more confident. Know your material, plan your work, answer the question carefully, and then you'll see improvements in the language. Not everything. Not everybody's going to be a H1 student in English. Not everybody's going to express themselves or articulate their thoughts with the kind of sophistication that the top students can, but we can all get better at it. I mean, for God's sake, most people don't even punctuate properly. And if that's you, and if I'm being too harsh, I don't care. I want to tell you the truth. The fact is that if you don't reread your work and check where your full stop should be and where your capital letters should be and where quotations should be, the quotation marks should be opened and closed, that's going to impact on the quality of your work. So there are simple things we could do to improve. The last thing I want to mention before I move on is mechanics. Now, this is just the marking scheme. The mechanics marks are worth 10% of every question that you write. Leah, if you say you read Gangster Granny yesterday, I'm delighted. I don't care what you're reading, as long as you're reading something. And the more you read, the better you get at English. It's not a difficult metric to figure out. Now, mechanics means spelling, but in the last couple of years, the examiner has been told to also include random capitalization. Now, people worry too much about mechanics. Very few students will lose all of the mechanics marks. To give you a simple example of this, and again, I'm conscious of the fact I want to get into the actual work now. If you're writing an essay should come in somewhere around 1,000 words. That's the length of an essay. And if you want to know how many pages, now again, Rick, this document, these are the mind maps. And again, I'm working on these mind maps here just to introduce. And I'll maybe have a think about whether I put these up for you to have access to them. I know that there are other notes up online, but I haven't put these ones online yet. I'll have a think about maybe doing it tomorrow. I'm just using this to start off the class. Random capitalization has become so prevalent, and that means people using capital letters where they're not meant to use them, that examiners in the last couple of years have been told, if you see that becoming a real issue in a student's work, feel free to take off a mechanics mark. So up until a couple of years ago, it was spelling and it was simple. A student had to make 4 distinct errors to lose 1 mechanics mark. Okay? 4 distinct errors. So that means 4 separate spelling errors. So if I read your working on the first page, you've made 4 spelling errors and they're all separate different words, then you will lose 1 mechanics mark. A lot of teachers remove a mechanics mark for every individual spelling mistake. That's not how the exam works. And in addition to that, if you misspell a word once, so often students struggle with receive and conceive, those words, okay? If you misspell a word receive once, and then you misspell it 2, 3 more times in the essay, you can't be doubly punished for it. So once you misspell it once, that counts as 1/4 of 1 mechanics mark. So it's actually set up that you're not going to be hammered for mechanics, for spelling. But what you need to do, again, is get into the habit of reading as much as you possibly can. And the more you do, the more your familiarity with words grows. And then if you get into the habit of rereading your work, when you get to the end of each paragraph, clean as you go, you'll find yourself, hopefully, on losing fewer mechanics marks. So it's been a bit of a hectic start with that screen flying away to my left here with all these comments. And again, as I said, I can see there's a question there, Sophie. Those kinds of questions, I want you to hold them until I get to the question and answer session towards the end of the class, because I can't keep on stopping and going to the screen. We've got a huge amount of work to do. I'm just going to deal, just to talk across myself, with 2 that are there and ask you then to hold them, guys, going forward. Sophie asked, if I have a spelling and grammar waiver, do we have to make these marks up for the rest of our PCL? If you've got a spelling and grammar waiver, there's a complicated metric applied to your paper, but essentially you don't get deducted those 10% of marks. That's it. So you're going to have those 10% of marks. So in other words, if you've got a spelling and grammar waiver, don't worry. Okay? But I still would advise you, if your work is very, very difficult to read because you don't punctuate properly, then that will impact upon your overall grade. So do be as careful as you can with your punctuation especially. The other question that I saw there, does having a shallow variety of language bring down your marks in the marking scheme, even if you're answering the question? Yes, James, but not by a huge amount. If I'm looking at a script and I'm deciding, is it a H4 or a H3, the language usually won't be the issue there. The issue there will be, attention to the question, variety of points, structure, those will be issues there. When you get up as far as deciding whether a script is a H2 or a H1 or a H2 or a H3, those students, they're on the question. They've learned their quotes. They know their evidence. They know how to introduce. They know how to conclude. And that's where the language then becomes a factor that you're looking at in order to distinguish. Okay, am I going to give this a grade that's going to bring it over 90%, or am I going to leave this in a high 80s? So that's where that can come into play, okay? Now, the guys who are managing that stream, I'd ask you to have a look at some of that stuff there. Okay, that's that done. That's the marking scheme done. Now, tonight is supposed to be our paper 1, so I'm going to get into paper 1. And in this first section of tonight, I'm going to look at last year's paper 1, and I'm going to just talk you through the question A task. Now, folks, really, 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 really important. Paper 1 is the neglected paper of Leaving Cert English. What you have to understand is you're making a mistake if you neglect it. It is worth the equivalent of 50% of your grade. And as long as I've been teaching English, and I started teaching English in 1997, I've had the bullshit artists telling me, well, you can't study for paper 1. And you're wrong. You can study for paper 1. Again, Robert, ask those questions when the time comes towards the end of the class, okay? It is a really, really, really easy paper to prepare for. But if you don't do the bit of preparation, you're throwing away marks. So that's the first thing. In terms of time management, on paper 1, you have 2 hours and 50 minutes. Now, I made a little video a while ago in relation to this, but I'm just going to reiterate what I said in that video in terms of paper one time management. 2 hours and 50 minutes is the equivalent of 170 minutes. Now we're going to look through this paper in a second, but you know that your question A task and your question B task, they're both worth 50 marks. And you know that your composing or your composition that is worth 100 marks. Now, 100 marks is the equivalent of 25% of your English grade. Now, I teach history as well. And the history RSR is only worth 20%. And you know how much work goes into it. Geography field study, the home ec project, so many subjects have, big lump of marks attached to a project. English doesn't at the moment. It will do in a couple of years' time. But that composition, which we're going to talk about tonight, is worth 100 marks. And it always astonishes me how little preparation most students put into it. I see there was a question on the stream there, what separates a H1? It's a very complicated question. Again, I'll come to it later on if it's asked later on. But one of the things that does separate out a student who can compete for those top 3 grades, H3, H2, H1, is the amount of prep they put into the composition. It is extraordinary to see how few students pay any attention to it before the exam. Any at all. They just say, you have to make it up as you go along. There is an element of improvisation, of that there is no doubt, but there's a huge amount of work that can be done in the composition. We're going to come to that in the third hour this evening. But just looking at that breakdown of marks, I want to just say to you, of those 170 minutes, my recommendation is that you give 70 minutes to your composing. Now, you can go up as far as 80 if you want to. Everything is flexible. You might be brilliant at writing a short story, or you might find writing a speech something that you're naturally good at, or you might be somebody who's really good at writing a discursive essay, so it might not take you 70. But I want you to go slowly. Take your time in choosing your question. Take your time in thinking about the structure of your answer. Take your time and develop out your points or your plots or characters or setting descriptions with a little bit more care. And I think 70 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes or 80 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes, that's loads of time. So I take those 70 minutes of the 170 and I carve them off and I give them down to composition. So when you're going into your mock exams in a few weeks' time, you take at least 70 minutes to write that composition. Then we think about the question A task. Now again, we're going to look at a question A task in a couple of moments. The question A task is worth 50 marks. So if you think about that, that's the same as studied poetry. Okay, the same as studied poetry, and yet often you see zero preparation and you see students completely unnecessarily dropping marks. And if they pay a little bit of attention to that, they can score really well. Now, the thing with the question A is there's quite a lot of writing to be done in it, and I'll explain that in a second. And that means that you've got to read the passage, and there are 3 passages, and you've got to pick which one you're going to do and then decide to be. So there's a bit of time to be, consumed there. For me, I'm saying 60 minutes for my question A. And if you get your composition done in an hour, well, that gives you a bit more time in your question A. If you get your composition done in 80 minutes, it gives you a bit less time. So you have to just manage these things. Okay? If you do the maths there now, you see how that works out. The question B task, which is also worth 50 marks. That question B task for me, I don't think you need any more than 30 minutes for that question B task. Now, if you do the maths on that and you go the low score here for the question for the composition, that means that you've got 160 minutes there. Okay? That's where that extra 10 minutes comes from. I don't think you should need 80 minutes to do your composition. I don't think you should need it. 70 should be fine if you've done your prep work. I certainly don't think you need 30 minutes, more than 30 minutes to do a question B if you know how to approach it. And the same with the composition question A. Now that can take students a bit more time. And so can this down here, the composition. But what I would love you to be doing is saying to yourself, that's my breakdown. Question A, 30 minutes. Question B, 60 minutes. Question B, 30 minutes. Composition 70. And that leaves me with 10 minutes. That leaves me with 10 minutes to just breathe at the start of the paper. Don't be that fool who goes in and just starts writing frantically. Do what we're about to do now. Sit down. Start the exam. Know you've got loads of time because you have a strategy that hopefully I'm going to help you understand tonight. Have a look through the paper. I would always start off looking at my composing titles. There are always 7 of them. I'm hoping to do the short story, or I'm hoping to do the personal essay, or I'm hoping to do the speech, or I'm hoping to do the discursive essay, whichever title you're looking for. And then you look at the short story title. Does it work for me? You don't just say, I'm doing the short story. You say, does it work for me? Or there might be 2 personal essay titles, and you might go, which there very likely will be, by the way. There tends to be. We're going to talk about that later on. I just got a message there telling me that the chat has been closed for a while until I decide to reopen it, because I want you to hold those questions. So I hope you don't mind that, okay? That'll be later on. We'll open that again. So when you look at this, these 7 options, you've only got to do 1, but choose carefully. You might have done a bit of prep work for the short story. You might have got a bit of, a characterization ready. You might have a setting description that you've practiced and your teachers thought is really good, and you've maybe done a good job of adapting certain scenarios to different question titles. You then look at your short story title and you go, okay, does that work for my prepared work? Or you look at your magazine article, when you've written a couple of those over the course of 6th year, and you have an idea, and you've read some of the sample answers that I've given you, or watched some of the video content because you're on the platform. You go, do you know what, that magazine article works well for me. But you take a time to breathe, because it's a really important choice. It's worth 25%. And then you go and you have a look at the 3 reading comprehension passages. There are loads of different approaches to this. The thing about English is there's no right answer often. But the fact is, you got 3 A's. There's text 1A and 3 B's. And as you know, remember I told you at the start of the class I was going to be telling you things you already know? As you know, A and B, you only got to do 1 A and 1 B. And again, every year you come across 5% of scripts that you correct where a student has done more than 1 B or more than 1 A and done neither of them properly. So 1 A and 1 B. The rule is, of course, you know this, that if you do this A here, then you're not allowed to do this B. You have to do your B from a separate text. Now, my preference has always been, I've always said to my students, pick your B first. The A's are usually quite straightforward, but pick your B first. So read the 3 question B's. This is what I'd be doing. I'd look at my composing, have a think about which essay I'm going to do, and decide on that before I start doing anything else. Then have a look at my B's. Read all 3 of them, and I'm going to show you how to break down and analyse a B into this evening's class. Read all 3 of them, and then decide which one you're going to do. And once you've then chosen your B, say for example you decide that you're going to do this B here because you like diary entries and you've done them in class and you know what you're doing, because that's the umbrella task there. Then you go, okay, well, I'm not even going to read text 3. I don't need to read it because I'm going to do either text 1 or text 2 for question B, for question A. Okay, so I think that's what you do with those first 10 minutes. You read the composing, you have a look at which title you're going to do. You read your question B's, you decide which question B you're going to do. And then of the 2 remaining A's you have, I would always think a very good idea is to have a look at, first of all, the 3rd question, which is called the style question. Now, This is the one where you're supposed to have, and again, so many students don't do this, but this is the one where you're supposed to demonstrate your study of language. Identify 4 elements of the writer's style and discuss how they contribute to making this an informative and engaging newspaper article. Why did I ask for 4 elements? You might look at that and go, ooh, not too sure about that. That's a tricky one. I'm going to have a look at the other text. We didn't do newspaper articles in school. We didn't do language of information. What's this one? Okay, so again, they're looking for 4 elements of the writer's style and discuss how they contribute to making this an entertaining and intriguing opening to a novel. Oh, well, I did novels in school, and I know that that is narrative writing. Now, I studied narrative writing because I went on the platform and I watched Paul's video on narrative writing, and I looked at his mind map on what to look out for in narrative writing. So I know exactly what I need to look for here. I need to look for characterization, dialogue. I need to look for universal themes, the use of aesthetic language. You've got a checklist. You've done the study. And the fact is, when I say those words, I know that 90% of the students on this call, right there when I said that, are kind of looking around them going, I haven't got a fucking clue. I don't know what those features are. The fact is, you're supposed to. The fact is that the reason that they're asking for 4 is because there's 20 marks going. And the expectation is, look up here as well, it's 15 marks going there. They ask you for 3 points. There's 15 marks going here. They ask you for 3 points. Now, again, I know you know this already, but the expectation is that you're going to write a paragraph for every 5 marks available. Remember I said a few minutes ago that you have to write quite a lot for your question A? That means you've got to write 10 paragraphs in response to a question A task. And you've got to be able to identify 4 different features of a particular style of writing. Now, I mentioned my mind maps. And this is maybe the benefits, of being on the platform. But there's a mind map which explains the features of discursive writing. There's one which explains the features of narrative writing or the short story. There's one on persuasion and argumentative writing. There's one on aesthetic language. There's one on speech writing and personal essay writing. We're going to come to that one later on. So the fact is that your competition in the Leaving Cert, the guys that you're going up against in the Leaving Cert, the people who the examiners reading their work alongside your work, don't forget, because if we're correcting the Leaving Cert now, we don't come home with a bag of scripts anymore. We receive them digitally into our computers in batches of 5 and 10. And I saw something that really made me smile earlier on when the chat was open at the beginning when we had the delay. I saw people saying, where are you from? And there were people from Limerick and Galway and Dublin and Wexford and Waterford and all over Ireland. And I'm thrilled to see that. But the fact is, that's the way it is for the examiner. So the examiner's not correcting the 25 guys in your class or the 120 guys in your 6th year in your school. The examiner is correcting a random selection of work. And the examiner is expecting that any Leaving Cert student who walks into the exam and wants to do well, and I think that's the key thing, who wants to do well will have done the work. And the work involves knowing, for example, what makes a novel entertaining or intriguing. Now, there are loads of different approaches to those questions, but there are also things you can study and learn. And remember I said at the start of this class, I said, it's really important that you don't fall into that trap of saying you can't study for paper 1. Yes, you bloody can. So, to go back to the strategy for your mock exams in a month's time, know your time. You've got 1 hour and 70 minutes. Spend the first, and this is just my opinion, the first 10 minutes calmly going through the paper, looking at the composing titles, picking the one you're going to do, whatever. You can answer the questions in whatever order you want to. Then look at the question B task. Then look at the 2 question A's that are left over. Choose before deciding which one you're going to do. And it's very important before you that the first thing you do is read the questions. Read both part 3 questions. It's not I, by the way. Read both part 3 style questions, and you might see one suits you more than the other. And then just before you take the plunge, just before you say, right, that's the A I'm doing, look at the second question as well. They can be really tricky. Usually, the first question is easy and the answer is obviously apparent in the text. Usually, the second question requires you to come up with an answer that isn't necessarily based in the text. It's like a piece of personal writing or a piece of argumentative writing. So for example, the 3 question 2s from last year's exam, 2 characters, Cass and Elaine, both intend to leave their hometown and never come back. Why do you think some young people have a dismissive attitude toward their home place? So you see the way that's not really about Cass and Elaine. That's about young people wanting to leave their home place. Can you be inspired by what the passage says? Yes, you can. But you can, and you're expected to, be imaginative and bring in other reasons, being a reasoned and rational writer in response to that answer. The vast majority of students don't display an ability to come up with these kind of original ideas. In the previous passage, the question was asking about tattoos. And it's because in the passage there's a motif, or that they're looking at the idea of tattoos. And it says, why do you think some parents don't like the idea of their children getting tattoos? Now again, there's a little reference to that in the passage. But the expectation is that you're going to be able to come up with a response to that question from your own opinions. And what you don't want to happen is to get to that question and go, oh crap, I've no idea what to say there. I picked the wrong question A. So that's where that breathing comes in. That 10 minutes at the start of the exam when everybody else is saying, more paper, and there's smoke coming off their script, you calm down, because they might be writing lots, but what they're writing is probably rubbish. So you take a methodical approach. What's my composition? Why is that my composition? Which question B am I doing? Why am I doing that question B? Which question A am I doing? And then with 10 minutes into the exam, then you start off. And you might start, a lot of people like to start with their B because it's short and you don't have to spend a huge amount of time on it. Some people like to start on the composing because it's the most important section in the whole paper. It's 25% double studied poetry, 40 marks more than single text, 30 marks more than comparative, for which you have to study 2 to 3 texts. We discussed that tomorrow. Very, very, very important. But the vast majority of people simply start with their question A because it settles them down and it's 3 tasks, 3 paragraphs for the first question, 3 paragraphs for the second question, 4 paragraphs for the last question. And what I'm going to do now is have a quick look at the second text from last year. And the idea here is I'm going to just show you some of the things that you could have identified in the passage, and then I'm going to show you a couple of sample paragraph answers and talk about structure and how you go about answering these questions. So this was from a super book, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. It's a really, really good book. And we're looking for aspects of Paul Murray's style that make it entertaining and intriguing opening to a novel. And of course, we're also looking for whatever it might reveal about the nature of friendship. In my opinion, when you are answering a question, it's always important to read actively. The very first thing I do when I walk into the exam, if I'm a student, the examiner hands me my paper and hands me my booklet. Then the invigilator says, you may begin. And as you begin to look through, put your hand in the air and ask them, can you have rough work paper? Now, in the mock exams, sometimes schools don't facilitate rough work paper because the paper costs a bloody fortune. But most schools will allow you to use rough work paper or will facilitate you and give you rough work paper. In the Leaving Cert, it's an obligation if you want rough work paper for them to give it to you. It'll be stamped and you hand it up with the rest of your script. And what you're doing with that rough work paper is you're making sure that you don't do that thing that causes so much damage to good students when they're doing the exams. which is forgetting what they're meant to be looking for when they're reading. I'm sure this has happened to you. You're reading a passage and you get to the end of the first page and you go, I've no idea what that was about. Or you read the passage and you might keep your concentration on what it was about, and then you get to the end and you go, what was the question again? And so you have to go back and go over it again. And this is where students who struggle with time management, or students whose work is often not purposeful, and remember P is the bar, or students whose work is not coherent, so not organized, this is where they have problems. They haven't got the focus on the question. So let's say we're looking at question 1 there. It says, what does it reveal about the nature of relationship? So I'm left-handed. So I have my rough work paper on the left-hand side, and when I'm writing it down, and here I am, and I'm going, nature of friendship. And I know this sounds nuts, but it works. Okay? And I have, in the exam, I've written it down, big angry letters like that. And then I move it to my right-hand side, so that when I'm writing my answer, it's always in my eye line. It's always there. I'm writing on the desk, and I have to go, okay, well, I'm looking for things on nature of friendship, nature of friendship, nature of friendship. And as I go through the passage, and I find things that are relevant, I mark them. Now, I'm going to show you one example of that before I move on, because again, time is of the essence here, okay? So let's have a quick look at this passage. And don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole bloody thing. I do that every week in the weekly classes. I've done that, and I've done this in great detail in the recorded material that's on the platform. You can have a look at that. But so that's why I'm not going through everything in minute detail here, because this is it's a exam preparation class, which means I've got loads to cover. Always read the background to the extract. I was trying to use this pen instead of this one, so that's called being old. The background to the extract, always read it. Text 2 is an edited extract from the opening of Paul Murray's novel The Bee Sting, shortlisted for the 2023 Booker Prize. The novel tells the tragicomic story of the Barnes family set in contemporary Ireland. In this extract, we meet a teenage daughter, Cass, and her best friend. Okay, so let's read the opening paragraph. And what are we thinking about? Nature of friendship. Cass and Elaine first met in chemistry class when Elaine poured iodine on Cass's eczema during an experiment. It was an accident. She'd cried more than Cass did and insisted on going with her to the nurse. They'd been friends ever since. Now, if I'm doing the Leaving Cert, I'm going in and I'm going, okay, lovely hurling. I'm going to be able to make a good point there. One of the things I can say about the nature of friendships, and I can write when I mark it, and by the way, I'm not suggesting you use the whole thing as a quote, you use part of it, but I'm marking that and I'm writing Q1, and I'm writing down my keyword random. Because that point, that little bit of an anecdote that the narrator gives us, shows us how, when we become friends with people, there's no design to it. It happens by accident. It happens, in our natural, the way we go about our day-to-day lives, and we can, have random encounters with people, and we can develop really close friendships as a result. And that then is the evidence that you have. So you've got a really good point about the nature of friendship, so it's purposeful, and you're able to develop that point using evidence and then briefly explain it. And that means that your work has structure and is coherent. Then you move on to the next point. Now, what happens to a lot of students is they read the passage, but they don't read it actively. So they see that point and they go, oh, that's a grand, I'll use that. But then they go back, they get to the end of the passage and they go, what was that point again? Or where was that point? So I'm saying to you, you are permitted, and you might get some of you, I've been doing this a long time, and I've been doing grinds with students, and not single one-on-one grinds, but with big classes for decades. And some of the mad stuff you hear from that goes on in schools is just, I need to write some of it down. But one of the things you hear is teachers telling students they're not allowed to write on the mock paper. You're not allowed to write in the mock paper because the teacher wants to use that mock paper next year or something. You are allowed. Now, I'm not saying to you to be getting in trouble with your teacher. In the Leaving Cert, the best students mark up the script, and that makes the writing of the answers easier. There's my point. There's my evidence. Now, I know exactly what I want to say, and off I go writing the paragraph. It is really, really, really important that you look at the different questions and that you mark it up. The other question that's important in this one is the style one, about whether this is an entertaining and intriguing opening to a novel. I just want to show you two things that you might be able to say. Have a look at this piece of writing, this paragraph here. And again, if you have studied the language of narration, and this is a narrative piece, you would know to look out for interesting characters. You would know to look out for the use of dialogue and what the effect of that is. You would know to look for a plot which has a discernible structure, and you would know to look for things like the setting, because the world in which the story is set has to be believable. That makes then the story immersive. So when we're reading it, we're drawn into the story the way Harry's drawn into Tom Riddle's diary in the second of the Harry Potter books. So that study has to be done, and the expectation is that you have it done. Now you look at this piece of writing here, and it says, I'm just looking at the clock here, I'll give you a break now in 5 minutes. We'll take a short break in 5 minutes, and then during that 5-minute period, I'm going to ask you, Tracy, if you don't mind, to open the chat when I get to the end of this part, and I'll come back to questions then at the beginning of the next part. Is that okay? So just have a look at this. Elaine hated their town. Everyone knew everybody. Everyone knew everyone. Everybody knew your business. When you walked down the street, people would slow down their cars to see who you were so they could wave at you. There was no proper shops. Instead of McDonald's and Starbucks, they had Binchy Burgers and Mangan's Cafe, where the owners worked behind the counter and asked after your parents. You can't even buy a sausage roll without having to tell someone your life story, she complained. Now, that's a gorgeous bit of humour there, which I really, really like. So the question is asking, again, I'm going to just mark that as Q3. And I'm going to write setting description. The question is asking whether or not the writer succeeded in making this an entertaining and intriguing opening to the novel. Well, that piece of setting description is simply entertaining. It's very, very detailed. It paints a vivid and realistic depiction of a place, and it contains a bit of humour which captures the reality of living in that place. You can't even buy a sausage roll without someone asking you your life story. So you write like that, you have a structured paragraph like that, and I'm going to reward you every single time, because you're confident, you know what you're looking for, and you know how to write responses. Look at this paragraph here, please. In the passage, we learn that one of the characters has a difficult relationship with her mother, and her friend actually gets on well with that character's mother. I'm going to read the paragraph. I can't believe she married your dad, she said candidly. Cass too sometimes had trouble believing it, that her dad, who was so thoughtful, so sensitive, had fallen for Imelda's, that's the mother character, 100% superficial allure like every other chump. She didn't want to devalue her mother in Elaine's eyes. At the same time, she didn't know how Elaine could think Imelda had mystique. Now, there's two things going on there, two possible separate points. You can talk about the idea that the author addresses universal themes. This is about families. Families where there is conflict. Families where the members of the family don't get on, and where that leads to resentment. And that's engaging and interesting and intriguing because we want to know how those conflicts are going to be resolved or not, as the case may be. The other thing you can write about there is that idea of creating anticipation. The author spends the first number of paragraphs of the novel building up the tightness, the closeness, the intimacy of the friendship between the two characters, Cass and Elaine. And then at that part, at the end, there's a suggestion that relationship may be headed for troubled waters, because one of them gets on really well with Imelda, and the other one, her daughter, feels that Imelda is 100% superficial. And that suggests that maybe the friendship between these two guys, Cass and Elaine, could be heading for trouble. We want to know, is it? We want to know what will happen. That is what intriguing means. And we're drawn into the story. Now, okay, Tracy, if you don't mind, open up the chat again for me, please. And again, guys, I want you only to put into the chat questions for me, and I'm happy to answer them. What I'm going to do in the next part of this class, because I'm always rushing for time in these things, is show you how, once you've analysed the passage, how you then go and, having analysed the passage, write the kinds of answers that an examiner is going to go, yeah, fair play to you, I'm going to reward you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break now, so you can get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever you have, and I'm going to grab a cup of coffee, and then, so it is exactly 27 minutes past, the chat is now open, it is exactly 27 minutes past, and I'm going to start again at 32 minutes past, give you 5 minutes, okay? So I'm not going to close anything down, you'll just see the thing behind me, I'm going to just mute my mic, okay? So 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 32 minutes past. Thank you, guys. Jeez, lads, I'm enjoying this now. Some brilliant questions there. I'm not going to get to them all, okay? And I wish the screen wouldn't keep on moving. I know you're all throwing questions in there. We're going to try and answer a few now really quickly, okay? We've got tons to do here. It's brilliant. Okay. So in terms of the class being recorded, yes, I think it is being recorded for you to have access to it, as far as I'm aware. Now, how long should each paragraph in a questionnaire realistically be in the exam? Not hugely long. I'm going to show you that now. Most students will write around 100 words, but there is a structure I would advise you to follow. It's not the only structure, but it is a structure that works that will help you write your paragraphs, okay? So we'll come to that in a moment. Now, see, there's so many messages coming in that's causing the screen to move. The marking schemes are available on examinations.ie for all subjects. Where was I there? Is an introduction necessary for question A? No. Your teacher might tell you it is. It's not. It's nice that if you want to write like an opening sentence that just introduces your stance on the question, but essentially the way it's marked is there's 5 marks for each point that you make, and each point that you make should be supported by evidence. So as long as you write 4 paragraphs which make distinct and separate points in relation to each question, then, or 3 paragraphs, 3 points, depending on whether it's a 15 or 20 mark question, the introduction is not necessary. Some teachers will tell you it is. I'm telling you now it's not, but you can, if you want to and you have time, write your introductions. When I talk about BME, again, these are things that I throw out there, and I mentioned earlier on, sometimes I forget that students don't. So it just means beginning, middle, and end. It's what the C in the marking scheme refers to. It refers to coherence of delivery. And BME means make sure that you're open by focusing on the question. I'm going to show you a sample answer now in a minute. By focusing on the question, develop your point in your subsequent paragraphs, and then conclude by referring back to the question. That's all that refers to. Smaller paragraphs refer different things to different teachers. That's a brilliant question, Zoe. I'm going to come to that question tomorrow in the paper 2 class. I think it applies more to a paper 2 question than anything on paper 1. How do you learn the techniques to each genre the best? You just need to make sure that you know what those, sorry, when you say techniques, you mean the aspects of each language. You need to get a decent set of notes. You need to decide how many points do you need to learn. You only need to learn 4 or 5 points per genre. And I would only prepare 3 genres. Like narrative writing, aesthetic language, personal writing, or persuasive writing, speech writing, because there's going to be 3 documents on the piece, and you only have to answer on 1. But like, you need to get a decent set of notes first. That breaks it down simply for you. Again, that's work we can talk about as we go through. There's too many questions coming up here. Do you know what I might do? I'll ask the guys in the office if it's possible. Will I be able to see all these questions after the class is over, and I can record a separate video maybe tomorrow or later on in the week in which I respond to a lot of these questions. When we first read through the comprehension to take highlight points, should we highlight? Oh, brilliant, Sanjeev. So I've just got information from the office there. The questions that are coming through, they'll be saved, okay? And then what I'll do is later on this week, I will post a video in which I go through all these questions slowly without feeling that surge of panic that I have to get through work here tonight. So if that's okay with everybody, I'll get back to the work, and you can just launch your questions into there. This is brilliant for me, all these questions, because I can answer most of them for you. But just for the purposes of getting through the work that I plan to do tonight, just keep on throwing them in there, and I will come to them later on the week. And you, as far as I'm aware, even if you guys have just signed up for the free class, I think you have access to the platform for a couple of days. So I'll make sure I check with the office when that's going to run out, so that the video is posted before then, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to get back to the work now. Now, Tracy, I'm going to ask you again to close the chat for me, if you don't mind. And then, guys, I'll open it again in the next break in the next hour. And just to say publicly to my colleagues who have to sit listening to me talking about English, I love you very much and thank you for your help. Now, folks, so we saw, I'm enjoying this now. So we saw, the types of questions that get asked, okay? And the same, I can guarantee you on your mock exams, I can absolutely guarantee you on your mock exams that these are the types of questions you're going to be asked. So there's no big surprise. Yeah, the text changes and the wording of the questions changes slightly, but the approach should be the same. So you look at the passage and then you think, okay, job number one is analysis. So I've got to read the questions, I've got to read the passage, and once I've got my, and this is another thing, by the way, a time-saving thing, is once I've got 3 ideas marked up for question 1, I don't need to mark up 4 or 5 ideas for question 1. I only need 3 because it's 15 marks. Same for question 4. Question 2 is slightly different. But once I do that, then the next job is writing the answers. Now, I was asked a really good question there a minute ago about opening paragraphs. Sorry, I'm just going to go to the correct one here. Yeah. About opening paragraphs. Now, and about the length of paragraphs. Now, you absolutely do not need to write really long paragraphs here. What you've got to try to do, and again, this is another video that I've already recorded and is on the platform. What you've got to try to do is remember what I call the Rick rules. And I'm the only person I know who calls it this. It's just my shorthand for writing effective paragraphs. And it works really well. A student on the chat asked a really good question that I didn't get to, but I'm going to refer to it now really quickly. The student said, I get all these ideas, and now again, apologies if I'm paraphrasing you here. I get all these ideas and I find it hard to get them down on paper really quickly. And then by the time I get them down, I forgot what they are. And I feel very muddled when I'm writing. That's so common. And that's something that we can fix. It's all about being economical. Just because you come up with 5 points, you're not expected to make those 5 points. What I would always do is pick the 3 points that you think are the easiest to prove with evidence from the passage. And just ignore, okay, on a different day, I could make those points. But no, I'm playing the game of the exam here. I haven't got a huge amount of time to write these answers, so I'm going to pick the points which are easiest to make. I only need 3 for part A1. I need 3 for part A2. I need 4 for part A3. And there I'm going to write I might write a little opening sentence. I had a student last year. You always learn loads from students if you're willing to listen to them. And a student last year in a grind class, and she said to me that she kind of likes writing introductions. It doesn't take long. She just writes a sentence or 2 because she feels that gets her set. So for example, here's a question, okay? What in your opinion does the writer reveal about the nature of relationships in text 2? You remember that question that we looked at, okay? Nature of friendship, in text 2. And the student, I said, okay, let's take a question like that. So the response would have been something like, well, I'd like to start off with the writer, and then give the writer's name, and makes a number of interesting points about the nature of friendship in text 2. And the first point the writer makes is, bang, off. That's great. Do that. That's absolutely fine. That's not writing a long opening paragraph. It's just setting yourself, showing that you're focused on the question. And another thing that comes up a lot, guys, is the nature of friendship. See that phrase, the nature of friendship? That's the key wording in the question. Now, does the examiner want you to use the word friendship in your answer? Yeah. Do they want to use to talk about, to try and vary your vocabulary a little bit and talk about things like companionship or sharing the journey of life? Yes, they do. But the most important thing is that you're on the question. So there's nothing wrong with repeating the words in the question, but the problem is when students can't show an ability to use synonyms. Do you know that word? Okay, words that mean the same thing. Or where students are paying what's called lip service to a question. And I wonder, do you do this? I bet most of you do, because most of the students I've taught over the last long time do it. Lip service means where they say, and this reveals so much about the nature of relationships. And I'm going, how? And that's why I like the Rick rules. Now, again, I'm not getting into this, but I'm just going to show you a couple of paragraphs. Loads of work to do tonight. The Rick rules mean start with a relevant topic sentence. So here is an introductory as I described a moment ago, like a kind of an opening sentence that just focuses on the question. This passage offers some thought-provoking insights into the nature of friendship. So no opening paragraph, but an OS. That's an OS. So that means that this sentence here is kind of like the first sentence of my paragraph. I don't separate them out. There's no need to. So the passage offers some thought-provoking insights into the nature of friendship. For example, the first paragraph describes the unpredictable nature of this particular aspect of human relationships. Now, there I have a point which is clearly, relevant to the question under discussion. Okay? So I've made that point, so I'm being purposeful or relevant. Now I've said it. Now I have to prove it. Okay? And that's what the I stands for, information. So make a relevant point, supply information in support of that point, a quote or a reference. I often put in more quotation than I should, but some reference. Murray writes, Cass and Elaine first met in chemistry class when Elaine poured iodine on Cass's eczema during an experiment. It was an accident. She cried more than Cass did and insisted on going with her to the nurse. They've been friends ever since. Now that's a good quote. It's a bit long. It's okay. And where would the candidate go wrong? So I've got 5 marks for this paragraph that I can allocate. That's how it works. Okay, so 15 marks for the question, 5 marks for each point being developed. Where the student might only get 2 or 3 out of 5, so 40 or 60% of the available marks, is they'll write that and then they'll say, and this shows the unpredictable nature of friendship. And I'm going, how does it show it? You haven't explained your point to me. Now, see that C there? That stands for the word contextualization. And that word simply means that you explain why the evidence that you're providing helps support the point that you're making and the overall response. So to take it as an example, if a barrister was in court and the barrister said to the jury that here are some fingerprints, they belong to the defendant, and they prove that he's guilty, send him to jail. The jury aren't going to send the defendant to jail based on that. They want the barrister to explain why the fingerprints are proof. Like, when were they found? Did the person have no business being where they were found? Were they found in relation to the crime? What was the timeline? You need to explain it out. And that's what most of you don't do. Take a couple of sentences or seconds to explain, or write another couple of sentences like this here, and then you have contextualization. I've got my color coding all wrong. But this is the most important part that most students don't do, or if I can say can't do, because of a lack of practice. This offers interesting revelation into the nature of friendship. Still on the question. We don't necessarily choose our friends. There's an error there. That's the first error. Such relationships are organic, born out of circumstance and random events. These events can be completely innocuous, but can also be the origin of friendships that can grow. To be important and long-lasting. Now, what you've got there is a H1 standard paragraph, which I'm after losing somehow. Bloody hell. There we go. As an examiner, you're reading that and you're saying, okay, look, this student here really knows what they're doing. So I'll change, just give me a second. I'm going to change the color coding here just so it makes a bit of sense. So you've got your relevant topic sentence. Then you've got your information. Okay, there's the information. The evidence. And then that is followed by the contextualization. And the second C then, it's all written in language which is clear and controlled. There's one little spelling error. It's no big deal. You've got really, really good punctuation, really good phrasing, and that's the first paragraph. And the examiner's reading that going, okay, this is going to be a good script. This student knows how to write. They're making relevant points. They understand the importance of, supporting points with evidence and then briefly explaining the evidence. And that's what the RIC rules are. And you've got to do that 3 times for your question A part 1. You've got to do that 3 times for your question A part 2. And you've got to do it 4 times for your question A part 3. Now, this note you do have, I've given you this. This is the sample answers to the 2024 paper 1 that I've given you. So you can read those notes yourself. I think that would be a good idea to read them and have a think about whether you think they're any good. And again, I'll never give you something and say, this is the answer. These are just my examples of what good practice looks like. And English is quite subjective, and what one teacher thinks is a H1 might be not what another teacher thinks is a H1. But we don't worry about that. What we worry about is getting a process clear in our heads. Okay, I know what to do when I walk into the paper 1. I know the marking scheme. I know my time management. I know what to look out for when choosing questions. Now, when I'm writing answers, I have a process. Topic sentence, if I'm going to write an opening sentence, fine. Then topic sentence, which is relevant to the question. Then information, either in the form of quotation or direct reference, in support of the point being made. And then 1 or 2 sentences where I try to explain my point and focus on clear expression, controlled punctuation. And if I can, we talked about vocabulary earlier on, didn't we, guys? If I can throw in a little bit of higher order vocabulary to put myself in that, give myself a chance of getting 5 out of 5 for the paragraph, or 13, 14 or 15 out of 15 for the question. And again, we go back to it. What can be the difference? The student who doesn't have any structure and just writes randomly, that student, no matter how good they are, they're very likely to get a H4 if they're really good, or maybe a low H3. The student who has a structure and isn't as good a writer as that other guy is going to score better because their work is structured and easier to follow. So it's a marriage. English is not one of those subjects, and it frustrates the shit out of me how it's taught, I think, in a lot of situations. You're never taught how to analyze or how to then present your work in a way which is cogent and is rewarded by the marking scheme. Purpose, coherence, language and mechanics, relevant, informed, contextualized, clear writing. You've got a much better chance of improving. So, conscious of time now. Okay. Because I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the question B tasks. So just again to show you, if I can go down to the 3rd question, this is on page 8 of that document, which you do have. Okay. And here's that one, 4 elements of the writer's style. And again, remember, why did I specifically say 4? And by the way, they don't have to. You're supposed to know that if the question is worth 20 marks, that you're required to. And that, there's so many things to tell you. If I saw you every week, it would be easier. That rule for every 5 marks write a paragraph, that only applies to 2 parts of your Leaving Cert English exam. It applies to your question A tasks on paper 1 and your unseen poetry tasks on paper 2. That a paragraph for every 5 marks available only applies to those 2 sections. It doesn't apply to the other sections, okay? Now, so look at that phrase there. Genre is a style of writing. You're supposed to be studying language throughout your time in secondary school. It's something that you're supposed to be doing since 1st year. Now, I'm well aware of the fact that you probably think to yourself, my teacher never did that. Almost every teacher does it. It's just that students don't feel engaged with it, I think, a lot of the time. And then when you get to the exam, they kind of don't know what they're looking for. So it's really, really, really important, as I said, that you try to get a grip on. Student asked an excellent question, how many aspects of each style or genre? 4 or 5? So again, sorry for jumping from document to document. Like I'll just pick a random one, right? So I've done narrative, haven't I? So here's persuasive writing. So like if you knew what buzzwords were and you were able to talk about the effect that buzzwords have in a persuasive article or a speech, if you knew what the conscience factor is and how the effect it has and why a persuasive writer or speaker would use it, if you knew what the effect of repetition is, these are just like little techniques that a writer might use. And if you wrote a paragraph in each one of those, you're going to be able to write your answer. So as I said, 4 to 5 elements, but I wouldn't try to do it on, narrative writing, aesthetic language, language of information. I never do language of information actually, because that's just when the writer provides evidence. There's nothing complicated about that. Persuasive language, argumentative language, or discursive writing, they're the same thing. And then the 6th one, which we're going to talk about in a little while, is personal essay, right, or personal writing. Now, personal writing tends to come up quite a lot now in the question A task. But again, it'd be really good if you just knew, personal writing is reflective. Personal writing is often very honest. It's built around anecdotes. Sorry, we'll get my pen going here. So say if you knew, really good personal writing is always reflective. We're going to come back to this map in a few minutes. Really good personal writing is always, feels like the person is being really honest. Really good personal writing is built around anecdotes, which flesh out the points and make the writing more engaging. Really good personal writing has an engaging opening, which grabs the reader's attention. 4 or 5 of those elements. And then when you look at the passage, you know what you're looking for. It's like that thing, when you go on a journey somewhere and you've never been before and it feels like it takes ages, but then when you're coming back, you're going exactly the same route in reverse and it doesn't feel like it takes that long at all. And that's because the first time you're kind of blind, you don't know where you're going. The way back, you've already been, so you have an idea. So that's what I'm talking about here. When you go into the exam, if you know what you're looking for, it makes the work easier. And again, I apologize if I am telling you things you already know, but the vast majority of students go into the exam and don't know what they're looking for in terms of language questions on that paper 1 question. That question is worth 20 marks. It's 5% overall. Students who perform well in it, that could be the difference between getting 68% and 73%, or getting 77% and 81%. So these are the little edges that can drive up your grade. If you do the prep, you've got loads of time to do that prep. Okay. Now, I'm going to park the question A's now, so you know what to expect. Now I'm going to go, because I need to do loads of work on the composition in the last hour. But I'm going to go and just talk very briefly about the question B task. Now, I know straight away you're going, I can see everybody going, phew, phew. It's like that program 15 to 1 where, there was a dating program a few years ago and there'd be all these people standing around 15 platforms and then the potential date walks out and they all just switch their lights off. As soon as you mentioned the question B task, students, even calling it the question B. Imagine if you had children, you called one of the children A and the other one B. You're sending a message. The question B task doesn't interest most students. It really doesn't. I'm only going to spend a couple of seconds on this mind map because you're going to start giving out because I haven't given you the mind maps. I can't give away the shop, guys. But the question B task is worth, again, 50 marks. The same as studied poetry. How many of you have ever studied the question B task and what to expect? I hope loads of you are there going, well, I have. My teacher does. And that's brilliant. That's good preparation. But if you haven't, it is important. Now, I'm not going through the map, but I just want to tell you, for the time that you have access to the platform, will I try it? I'll try it. I'm going to get myself in trouble now with the bosses. Oh, it is there, right? Oh my God, they put a Christmas background. I have to log in again. Hopefully this works here. Yes, there we are. Jesus. So my wife still gives out to me over that day last July when I posed with a dark shirt under a dark jacket. Anyway, we'll change all that around. But when you go into here in the platform, so you go into subject English, you'll see understanding paper 1. And then you'll see the composition mind map, the question A mind map, the question B. So I've already recorded those lessons. So if you're going to join us, and I hope you do join us on the platform for the rest of the year, all of that stuff is there for you. If you're only going to stay on the platform for a couple of days, then those are videos that are worth watching. If you were to ask me once to kind of get you going, I think most of you will be grand on paper 2. We'll talk about that tomorrow. There's a lot of marks to be picked up on paper 1. And I think question A and question B is a place for that. So highly recommend you have a look at that. Okay, now, so the thing you have to know about the question B, if I was to tell you the 2 most important things you have to know about the question B, besides the amount of marks that are available for it and the time you should spend on it, is the fact that the question B task will always have what's called an umbrella format. And the umbrella format will usually require you to be audience aware. Now, what's an umbrella format? Well, it means that they're going to tell you that you have to write in a certain particular style. So a personal letter, a podcast, an editorial, a feature article, a promotional article, an introduction to a collection of essays, a speech to a particular audience, a diary entry. Now, they're all umbrella tasks from the last 3 or 4 years of exams. So what you're doing straight away is you're pretending to be someone that you're not. You're not somebody who's broadcasting on a podcast. You're not the editor of a magazine or a newspaper. You're not a journalist who writes a feature article. So they are exercises in imagination. Now, sometimes you can write as yourself, but even when you're writing as yourself, you're pretending to be in a situation that you're not really in. I'm going to show you that in a second. So don't be afraid. What we're looking for here is, imagination. Most people, am I allowed to say this? I'm going to get myself in trouble again. I have to stop. Remember, I'm on the internet here. Most people are boring. And when you read what is supposed to be a creative writing exercise, it's often unimaginative. The idea here is to operate within the question, but make me smile. Make me think, God, I haven't come across one like that before. Write with a bit of energy. Write with a bit of imagination. So there's always an umbrella task. And then, and I'm going to show you this now, the pattern for the last, I think it's 9 or 10 years in a row now, is that each question B task will contain 3 specific subtasks within it. And the expectation is that you're going to deal with all 3 of those to a greater or lesser extent. You don't have to deal with them equally. That was I hope you couldn't hear that. That was my phone making a funny sound in my ears. So you don't have to deal with them equally, okay? If you go into the exam and you don't deal with those specific tasks and all 3 of them, then you're dead in the water. You're going to lose your marks, okay? And I'll show you how in a second. So let's pick. Now, normally what I would do here, if we were on a kind of a live class, I'd say to you, okay, pick one of these. So let's pick a random example from 2022 exam, and then we go and have a look. Have I got the 2023 ones there? I don't. We'll have a look at the 2024 ones in a couple of minutes, okay? So let's go for, which one did people score badly in? I'll have a look at the text one for a moment. I corrected leave insert in 2022, so this is fresh in my mind. Sorry about the sound effects. So, straight away, look at the first word of this question. Imagine that you are Salim. Now, Salim was the character in the passage. So, in the one I showed you a minute ago, like Cass and Elaine. And you have been in London for a year. Write a new personal letter, because the passage itself was a letter, to your mother, in which you, and then do you see that there's a colon there? See that colon? Don't know what I did there. So you look out for that, and your mock exam, they might not do the colon structure, but there will be 3 instructions, or there should be. Now, if there aren't 3, that's okay, because they've decided not to do it. But the pattern for the last 9, 10 years is there will be 3. And then there'll be 3 instructions. Have a look at this though. number one, sorry, just going to get rid of that. So number one, describe a number of experiences you have had that you believe will fascinate your mother. So describe a number, it says a number of fascinating experiences. So that's instruction verb number one. Describe, you have to be descriptive. So the expectation is that you're going to use a bit of narrative writing or aesthetic language. Then number two is reflect. That's a second instruction verb on both the positive and negative insights you've gained into human nature as an outsider in London. And three, then, consider some of the ways you believe your experience in the city has altered you as a person. Now, can you see how many places there are to go wrong there? First of all, that day when that exam came out, I was sitting at home, as I always am on the day of paper one, feeling very relaxed because I've done everything I can to help my students prepare. And I got messages from students saying, Paul, I did the question B from text one, and I forgot it was meant to be Salim. Will I be okay? I wrote it myself. And of course I went back and said, look, you'd be grand, because you don't want to give people negative news. But the fact is that if you were told, if the first words are, imagine you are Salim, and you didn't do that, is your work purposeful? No. So your mark immediately goes straight down. So even then, students who did remember to remember that they were Salim, they didn't write about new experiences. They wrote about the experiences that were described in the passage, simply repeating what was in the passage, not imagining what might have happened in the intervening year. So P mark straight down. Here it said you had to write about both the positive and the negative. It didn't say positive or, it said and. A lot of students only wrote about the negative or only wrote about the positive. And all the time, that 15 marks that are available for the P are going down, 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 down. And so if I read it, and you did remember you were Salim, but you didn't, you started off, dear mama, and then, because in the passage he calls his mother mama, so you do that, and then you didn't in any way refer to your mother for the whole rest of the passage, and then you just wrote, I hope to see you soon, mama. I'm going, that wasn't really a personal letter. I'm going to take a couple of marks off for that. They were told to deal with both the positive and negative insights into human nature. They only dealt with the negative, and they never even considered some of the ways that places changed them. So what am I going to give them for a purpose? I'm going to give them 6. Now, if your score for purpose is 6, then your maximum score for coherence is 6. Your maximum score for language is 6. So remember, for every mark that you drop for purpose, you don't drop 1, you multiply that mark by 3. Because you will not get a mark for coherence and language which exceeds the mark you get for purpose. It is so important that you drill down into the question B task, and then you use your rough work paper to remind yourself of what you have to do. Now, let me show you last year's paper 1 really quickly, conscious of time. So here's last year's paper 1. I hope some of you are still on the call. Look at the different options there were. I'm going to read the 3 questions really quickly and just show you how to take apart these questions. In text 1, Fintan O'Toole refers to how different generations can have differing views on issues. Write the text of a dialogue. So that was the umbrella task. Oh, apologies. Between an adult and a young person who have opposing viewpoints about a contentious issue of your choice. In the dialogue, you should develop, and again, look, there's the colon. Develop the arguments on both sides. Jesus, Paul, come on, get used to using this pen. So that's the first instruction. Then you had to conclude the dialogue in a convincing manner, with one side conceding to the other in some way. That was really hard. I would have been running, sprinting, looking over my shoulder away from that question. Ah! So many places to go wrong. It's really hard to write a dialogue. You have to come up with what the issue is. You have to, develop those two characters. You have to have them speaking in language which is believable and plausible. You have to conclude in a convincing manner. What the hell does that mean, convincing manner? What the hell does contentious issue mean? What the hell does... That was the very definition of one of those questions that they put on the paper. And you just... Now, again, I know that you're going to immediately put a message in the chat and you're going to go, Paul, my friend did that last year and did really well. And I'm delighted. And one of the things about English is there's a huge variety, an a la carte variety of different types of students and what they're good at. Sorry, I'm just constantly looking at my clock here to make sure I don't go over time. But that, folks, for the average student was really hard, really vague, and the umbrella task, the dialogue was tricky. Okay? So that wasn't for me an option. The second one. Certain aspects of the area where you live have become run down and neglected. Write here's your umbrella task, proposal to your local Tidy Towns committee in which you, here's your colon, outline your key concerns in relation to the problems you've identified. So there's the first task. Easy to write a paragraph on that. Propose a project that you believe would improve the situation. Easy to do. And suggest how the committee could encourage more members of the local community to become active in improving the local area. Now that's much easier. It's much, much, much easier than the first one. And there's a real obvious structure there. You're going to write for the question B, and again, you'll see this when you watch the video, the general rule of thumb, and that means you don't have to stick to it. But the really good students who kind of have the practice in, what they'll do is they'll write around 5 paragraphs for a question B task. So in other words, one for every 10 marks available, if you like. Here, the structure was very, very easy. You're going to write key concerns in relation to the problems you've identified. So that might be 2 paragraphs, because there might be more than one problem. So give a paragraph to each problem. Then a paragraph on the project and explain what it is and why you think it would improve the situation. And then a paragraph on how they could encourage more members. Add to that an opening which addresses the members of the committee and thanks them for hearing you and references their role in the local community and its value, plus a closing paragraph which reiterates that point and thanks them again and says that you hope that they'll take on board your points. Then you have a really, really nice structure to an answer. So my point is, remember I said it at the start, read the questions before you dive in. The structure to that one was significantly easier than the structure, to that one. The other option that year, and some people like pineapples on pizzas, so a question which could really appeal to one student might not appeal to another. Here again, watch out for the structure. So there, the diary entry, we mentioned this already, that's the umbrella task. Write a series of reflective diary entries. If you don't know what reflective means, should you answer that question? Absolutely not. So if you look at a question and you don't know what a keyword means, go and pick another question. There's always options. Write a series of reflective diary entries of a person returning to their home place after travelling for a whole year in different countries. In your diary you should, and look, there it is again. And then you have your 3 tasks. Consider your feelings on returning home. Really easy. Missed your family, missed your friends, feeling a little bit of regret at leaving the places that you visited and a longing to return to them. Loads of things to say. Recall and analyse some specific moments and events that stand out for you from your travels. Remember I said that these require you to be imaginative. So the fact is that it is very likely that 100% of the people who answered this question last year had not in reality just returned from a year traveling. So they had to make it up. They had to pick a place and describe that place and why visiting that place was significant. But I mean, Jesus Christ, you've all travelled to places. Maybe you've been to London. Maybe you've been to watch a match in Liverpool, actually. Maybe you've been to Paris on a school tour. Maybe you've been to Kos on a family holiday. Maybe you've been to New York if you're very lucky and travelled a bit around the States. Whatever. You bring in your knowledge of that place and you be descriptive and make it more interesting. And then the last one, and reflect on how the experience has influenced your overall worldview now. So I thought that the diary entry question was lovely, easy peasy. It said a series of reflected diary entries. I would have written 5. I could have, on my structure, I might write 2. I might write 2 on my feelings on returning home, because it could be mixed feelings. It could be really, really happy to be home, but then kind of really regretting that my journey is over and longing to continue the journey. Then I might write just 1 on the second part of the question about that moment and those events where that really stood out for you, or you could write 2 there, and then write, what was colour? Go for green. 1 or 2 on how that experience has changed your worldview. And then you can decide, right, I need to do 5. So I'll do 2 there, I'll do 2 there, and 1 there. And I'll just keep on starting. And people say to me, Paul, would you start off with Dear Diary? You don't need to do that. You just need to make sure with a diary entry that you put a series of dates, and if the dates make sense in relation to the task you're doing. So the question Bs, they are, I love them. But the fact is that every year on year, when you look at the data and the examiner breaks down the data, the average student will score between 30 and 34 out of 50 in the question B. Now that's between 60 and 68%. That means the H4. Now that means that the vast majority of students do not score well enough in the question B. Now, why is that? Well, ask yourself, how many times have you broken down question Bs like that? How many times have you actually practiced without being told to, without being a homework, writing a question B? How many times have you gone into a document like this one, and again, you have a copy of this one. I decided to give you these ones. I've loads of question B samples because I thought they were a nice selection of questions. How many times have you simply sat down and read a couple of question B sample answers and gone, okay, I can see where I'm going wrong there. I know what I need to do. And again, remember I mentioned earlier on about working in Leesa Street and students arriving in thinking this was going to solve all their problems and the magic fairy dust comes sprinkling down their head. I love this stuff. I'm thrilled that there are people on this call who I don't know and I haven't met before, and they might get one thing. They might think everything else was rubbish, but they might get one thing that's going to help them pick up those extra 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% that's going to make them feel more confident when they go into the exam in June. That I love that. But the fact is, there are certain truths in life, and one of them is, if you don't work hard, you're very unlikely to get good outcomes. And you'll hear all the nonsense talkers saying, well, I never studied for English and I got a H1, or I only did 1 poet and it was easy. Again, I'm just basing it on all my experience. The more you read, the better you're going to be. There's no success guarantee. There's no button you can press. There's no lifestyle you can adopt that's going to change it. But the more you read, the better you're going to be. And one of the things you can do is read samples. Have a look at these 3 samples here really quickly. So this one is from 2018. Just ask yourself, if I had these 3 to do, which one would I do? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you an example of one of these, and then we're going to take another break before we go into the last hour, okay? Hopefully there's 1 or 2 of you still with me. And again, if you want, I'll open up the chat in the break in about 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes, and you can throw in whatever questions you have. So here's an option. This was from 2018. Young people are often the recipients of unwanted advice. Write an open letter, and in the question then, See that little asterisk there? Sorry. There we go. See the little asterisk there? That was, they explained what an open letter was. So an open letter is a letter that you're writing, you're not writing it to one specific person necessarily, but you're writing it to be published online. You could be, or published in a public forum. You're not sending it to a personal, in a personal way, the normal way a letter would be. To all those who have ever offered you unwanted advice, in your letter you should, and again, look at the, remember I told you? Here, the colon wasn't there, but there's your first instruction. Identify some nuggets of unwanted advice you have received. 2, describe your response to receiving such advice. And then 3, share your opinion on how and when advice should be appropriately offered. So I like that. That was question. That question was lovely. Your letter may be humorous, amusing, or serious, or both. Okay. Lovely, lovely, lovely question. Broken down the open letter format, which requires you to directly address the people you're sending the letter to. That's what recipient means. The 3 tasks, very, very clearly laid out. The nuggets, what was, you have to come up with the unwanted advice. Maybe you really have received unwanted advice, so you have to make it up. How you responded to that advice, because that's in the question. And when you think advice is suitable to be offered. Now, this was the marking scheme instruction for that question. If you look at the English marking schemes, they don't reveal too much until you drill down into them. I'm going to just take a minute to show you this, right? So this was written by the Chief Examiner for English. Expect candidates to write an open letter. So that's the most important thing. That's the umbrella task. If you forget you're writing an open letter, you're snookered for purpose. And remember what that does? Every 1 mark you lose in purpose, you lose 2 more marks for coherence in language, so you multiply by 3. To all those who ever offered them unwanted advice, in the letter they should identify some nuggets, and then it just goes on and repeats the question. But then it says, really, really importantly, allow for a broad interpretation of unwanted advice and a range of approaches to the task. Now, what does that mean? That means that the examiner, as long as you're on the question, there could be 15 different ways that that students have answered the question. So the examiner has to leave their prejudices at the door. So the way they would answer the question, that's our way of answering it, in the same way as you might like a pizza which has pineapples on it. I might, and I don't mind admitting I do, I might like a fried egg on my pizza. And I know you're appalled. doesn't make me wrong. So the examiner's saying, look, this is like cooking. This is an exercise in imagination. It has to be recognizably a pizza. It has to be an open letter about unwanted advice. But candidates can take a really kind of funny approach. They can be really deadly serious. They can be very formal. It can be anecdotal. It can be based in evidence. There's no wrong answer as long as you're on task. That's what that means. The crucial thing then is the marking scheme. And it says P for purpose. Understanding of genre and register. What does that mean? In other words, it's an open letter, and it's personal, and it's designed to give advice about when, to recommend when such advice should be given. So it should be persuasive. There's loads of things to say. But the most important thing it says is that the student needs to focus on all aspects of the question. So again, as I've said earlier on, if you left out one of them, if you dealt with that really well, and you dealt with that really well, but then you said you forgot to deal with that one, well, straight away, I've got 15 marks for purpose. And I'm going, oh, bloody hell, they did part A really well, they did part B quite well, but they didn't do part 3 at all. So I'm going to be really generous. I'm going to give them a score of 10 out of 15 for purpose. Because they left out a whole section of the question. Even if you wrote 5 paragraphs, if you didn't answer one aspect of the question, it's like saying, well, you know, I've a bicycle and I've only got one wheel on the bicycle and the back wheel is gone, but it's still, is that not good enough? No, it's not. You have to turn up bicycle means 2 wheels. Question B requires you to do the 3 tasks and the umbrella task. So again, if I do that and I go, okay, coherence was okay, I'll give that 9. Language was actually really good, I'll give that 10. Not allowed to exceed, but I'm allowed equal. They didn't make very many basic spelling errors at all. And their capitalization was fine. So I can give that 5. Sorry, no, what am I doing? Yeah. I give that 5. Look what that adds up to. You can do it in yourself, right? 10, 20, 9, 34, 68% of the available marks. What did I tell you is the average score year on year on year? And the question B, it is between 30 and 34 out of 50, and that's a H4 grade. So just be aware of those things, okay? Now, that's a sample answer. I'm going to I want to show you another question really quickly. So that was one option. Would you have done that one if this was another option, okay? So was that the same year? This was the same year, 2018. So again, this is a great way to study. Just get, go onto examinations.ie and pick a random year. If you go back beyond 2018, I think, or 2017, the structure of the question Bs is slightly different. In other words, they don't always have the 3 tasks. Generally they do, but not always. But just go back and look at a year and just read the 3 Bs and say, which one would I do? And if I was going to do it, how would I do it? Just that on its own is really, really effective. Okay? If you can then every once in a while write a couple of paragraphs and time yourself doing it, and then read some samples if you have access to samples and you have access to these samples, that's not a bad idea either. How am I doing for time? I've got 5 minutes. So this is based on the text. The children in text 2 experience an unconventional education. Based on your experience of second level education. And guys, can I give you a piece of advice? If they ever give you the option to answer a question that's based on your experience, really consider that as a good option. And don't worry about the fact that you think that everybody else is going to do the same question. Your paper will be marked on its merits. So if I'm sitting down at this desk next summer, as I probably will be, and I'm marking the Leaving Cert, and I look at the script and the student has decided to answer text 2 question B, and the last 15 scripts I've corrected, 11 of them were text 2 question B, that doesn't make any difference. This idea that, oh, you'll be marked down if loads of people do the same question, absolute nonsense. It's all the noise that gets thrown out there, particularly in this age of social media, which seems to give a megaphone to every idiot in the world. We will mark your paper on its merits using the PCLM marking scheme. And it doesn't matter whether or not Billy or Jack or the previous 6 or 7 candidates have done the same question. So on your experience of second level education, write an opinion piece. So it's an opinion piece. What language genre is that? That's language of argument. Suitable for publication in a national newspaper. So it's a newspaper article, magazine article. Often today it's an online article. So you should know what you're doing when you're looking at those if you're going to choose it. Do you know what a newspaper article would have? Have a headline, have a subheading, be audience aware, be written in a way which is accessible, not overly complicated in terms of language because you have a broad readership. There are things, if you're going to choose that, there are things that I'm expecting you as a top quality candidate to be aware of when you're writing. In which you acknowledge what, now again, you'll see the 3 instructions. So instruction number 1, acknowledge what you see as the strengths of the education you have received, okay? So that's a paragraph or 2. Then criticize what you see as the weaknesses. So that's a paragraph or 2. And then make suggestions for its improvement. Now, isn't that so much easier? Well, it's up to you to decide, pineapples on pizzas. For me, that is ridiculously easy compared to that one. Much, much, much easier. I mean, you're sitting in an examination hall answering the bloody Leaving Cert. So write a paragraph about things that you've experienced in school that were positive. There must be 1 or 2. And then tease those things out. And don't just say they were positive, but explain why they were positive. And by the way, that year, again, my memory of that year was so many people wrote about making friends in school. That's not really about your education. And I remember reading those answers going, it's not really on the question. I'm gonna if they develop it about social skills and interpersonal skills and how, just the very fact that we're having to meet different kinds of people, then I'm gonna be generous there. But if you just say, oh, the great best thing about school was meeting my friends, I'm going, okay, but I didn't ask you about school, I asked you about education. And those 2 things are slightly different. So there's those little nuances. I'm sure you're able to find weaknesses in your education because it's very, very easy to find weaknesses in any system. And I'm sure you're able to make suggestions for improvement. So when you're looking at a question B task, be careful that you understand what the umbrella task is. So one of them there was an open letter. This one here is a letter, an opinion piece for a national newspaper. By the way, the sample answer is there. I'd love you to read it. I haven't got time to do it now. If you'd like me to make a video and post it on the platform as I go through it, I will. And then there was this one, which has to rank up there as one of my favorite question Bs. And remember, it is absolutely, completely within the remit of the examiner to ask you, or to not ask you, sorry, because there's never you never have to do anything compulsory. There are always different options. To give you a question which requires you to demonstrate knowledge of your paper 2 material on paper 1. Okay, I love that. This was a great one. And again, you can read it yourself. Your school principal has agreed to your suggestion to display 3 poems or extracts from 3 poems on the 2017. That was that, so 2025. Yeah, it is 2025. Sorry, I'm so old. Leaving certificate higher level English poetry course in your school. You've been asked to choose the poetry and decide how and where it will be displayed. That's the umbrella task. But again, it's an article for your school's website, again, similar to the newspaper, in which you, and again, look at the 3 instructions, explain your choice of poetry, explain your ideas for its display, and explain the impact that you think this will have on your school community. So you pick a couple of quotes from poems that you have for the next day and write a couple of paragraphs there, then a paragraph on ideas for its display, and then a couple of paragraphs on the impact you hope it has in the community. Loads of scope there for imagination, loads of scope there for engagement. A really, really, really lovely question B. Now you might be looking at that crying going, are you having a laugh, Paul? Horrible question B. Remember, there will be 3 choices. You don't have to answer on any individual. You just have to pick one and do it. And what you have to do is analyze the question, understand what the umbrella task is. In other words, what you're pretending to do, what the imagination aspect of the question is, and then make sure you identify those 3 instructions and write at least 1 paragraph on each one of those instructions, plus 1 with an introduction and a conclusion, and you'd be sucking diesel. There's so much more I could say about bees. There's loads more about it on the platform. I'll be doing loads more in the live classes as we go through the year. But for the moment, I'm going to park that now. It's 29 minutes past. So I hope you don't mind. We will be going up to about 9:30. I apologise about that because we had a delay at the start. I'm going to take a 5-minute break now, give everybody some chance to get a bit of air. And then we're going to come back and talk about the composition. Again, I'm going to ask Tracy, if you don't mind, or Sanjeev to open the chat and let the students throw in whatever questions that they have that I can answer then later on in the week. So we'll give it 5 minutes and I'll see you at 25 to 9. Cheers, guys. How's it going, guys? Welcome back. I just sent a text to my boss there saying, I wonder, is there anybody still on the call? But it looks like there's a few of you. Tracy, if you wouldn't mind just leaving that open for a minute before we shut it down, because I'd just like to read a couple of things there before we get into the third hour of the class. And again, by the way, somebody said to me, a rocky start, but we got going. I hope you're finding this useful. I really do. Just a couple of things there. And I am going to deal with all of these questions. I'll record a kind of a response to all these questions, and we'll have it posted for you, okay? And even if you're not on the platform, we might post it on our YouTube page, so so that you can get those responses. But there's a couple of things there. Now, again, books that I'd recommend you read. I couldn't tell you one, because of course it's such a broad paper. It depends on the type of writing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and we're going to talk about the composition. And again, I've only got an hour to do this, and there's a lot of work here, so apologies if I'm skipping over things. We're going to talk about the composition. Okay, so here is the if you want, Tracy, if you want to close that now, thanks guys. I really appreciate the positivity. And I'm going to come back to those questions in a second. But I'm just going to talk about that. Would I recommend, what books would I recommend? Okay. So look, here is the composing section, right? Thank you, Tracy. And Dylan and Ronan and Sanjay, even all of you. You know, I mentioned earlier on, this is worth 25%. Now again, sorry for jumping between screens here now, okay? Again, I have a mind map done, which just breaks down everything I'm about to say here on the composition, okay? I'm not going to go through the mind map. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that. But it's important that you kind of get a grip on just the different aspects of each part of the paper, each challenge that you're going to face as you come along. But when you go into the exam, there will be 7 titles, okay? And you will have to answer one. Now, there are 3 types of essay that will be on your paper. This is not written down legally binding, but there has never been an exam. There has never been an exam where there hasn't been at least one short story option, at least one speech option, and at least one personal essay option. Okay? There's never been an exam where that hasn't been the case. So I would love to think, and I'm just thinking about my own 6 years now, and I'm laughing because some of you, if you're on the call, lads, I hope you're all doing well and having a nice Christmas. Some of the lads will know straight away, I'm doing the speech or I'm doing the short story. But some of them don't think about those things. So they just walk in, and that's normal. That's okay. Not everybody's into English. And then on the day they go, well, I'm going to do that one. But the fact is that if you choose, or how do I get this across? If you choose to write a short story on the day of your Leaving Cert in a section that's worth 25%, the examiner expects that you'll be able to demonstrate that you've practiced and you have a good understanding of how to write a short story, that you're not just doing it on the fly. Now, again, some people can perform really well on the fly, particularly in this section. But one of the things you're being examined on, and a student earlier on said about the marking schemes, when you look at the marking schemes, I'm going to do it again, apologies. When you look at the marking schemes for composition, the very, very first thing it says before each composition is understanding of genre. That's the very first thing it says. So if I'm marking the Leaving Cert of any given year, or Mary or Jack or Joe or Jill are marking the Leaving Cert in any given year, the very first thing they're saying when they're okay, I'm going to mark this student's work, and believe me when I tell you, the people who do it, they're really good. You can trust this. I won't often say this. You can trust the system. It's marked really fairly and really efficiently with great oversight by people who've been doing it for a long time. Understanding of genre is the first thing that's written down. Now, what does that mean? It means that if the candidate decides to write a short story, that their work is going to contain evidence of understanding of how to write a short story. So to go back to the question that was asked, read short stories. If I was to go to one book for the short story, I would suggest you read Stephen King's book on writing. It's pride of place on the shelf behind me there, alongside Shakespeare and His Christmas Jumper. The elf on the shelf did that. But anyway, we forgive him because we love Shakespeare and the Christmas Jumper. But the short story there's a trick to writing short stories. And Stephen King, in that book, in the first half of that book, he basically tells loads of stories about his childhood. But the second half of the book, he talks about how to write stories effectively. It's really, really good. I'd have a look at that. And then I'd read maybe a couple, you can find them online for free, short stories by people like Chekhov or William Trevor. Oh Christ, her name has escaped me. The author of Small Things Like These, which I'm sure many of you are doing as your Claire Keegan. She has a wonderful book of short stories that I have. It might be downstairs now. I can't remember what it's called, but read short stories. But if I was to recommend one book, Stephen King's On Writing, super. Then if you're looking at how to write a speech, what should you do? You should read effective speeches. So go off and get a decent set of notes on what a speech contains. And again, there's a video online on the platform where I explain the qualities of an effective speech. But then go and sit down and watch, the famous speeches. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, Churchill's wartime speeches. There are loads. Google effective speeches and sit down and read them. Go onto YouTube and Google effective speech writing and listen to what various different people have to say, and you'll hear them contradicting each other, but there'll be a Venn diagram of things that are close. So it doesn't necessarily have to read a book, but you need to read effective speeches. And when it comes to personal essays, a personal essay is a form of autobiography. So there are amazing autobiographies, and I've got some of them in this note that we're going to look at here. But the one I read, the last one I read, that really just made me go, Christ, that's so well written. Sinead O'Connor, the late and lamented Irish singer and very talented person, her autobiography, which the name escapes me at the moment, it came out a couple of years ago. I'm nearly sure it came out around this time of the year, around Christmas time. And it's really raw and engaging and entertaining and laugh out loud. If you can find an autobiography where somebody writes very honestly about their life in a very engaging way, that's what you're looking for in terms of personal writing. So there's no one book that's going to solve all your problems. But to know, look, I'm planning on writing a personal essay, so I just need to read some autobiographical work. There's a book on the course called Educated. I don't know if any of you are studying it, by Tara Westover. There's another one. Oh, it's got to come to me in a second. It's about the boy who swims the English Channel when he was like 10 or 11 years old. A Boy in the Water, it's called. They're both on the Leaving Cert course this year. And they're both really, really good examples of personal writing. So the more you read, the more aware you are of genre, the more likely it is that when you go into the exam and you start writing, you're going to look like you know what you're doing. That's no guarantee, but that's going to help. So that's that question dealt with. Now, so let's go to work here now. The reason I said I'd do the personal essay tonight is because when you talk to students and when you correct the Leaving Cert, you talk to people who correct the Leaving Cert, up to 60% of students who sit the exam answer in the personal essay. So the first thing I want to get clear to you is that there is nothing wrong whatsoever with answering the personal essay when loads of other people are going to be doing it as well. As I said a moment ago, your paper is marked on its merits. And if I sit down and I read your title and you're doing section 2, composition, question 3, personal essay, I don't go, oh shit, not another personal essay. I go, okay, this could be a good one. And personal essays can be really interesting. So if you're not doing personal essay, you don't have to stay in this call, although it will be useful to you because it could be a backup if your short story title isn't nice or your speech isn't nice. That's why I'm doing it. So loads of people do it, and then loads of people have it as a backup. So I'm going to go through this note really quickly, and I want you to remember that I have this done in a much more kind of granular way on the platform, and there's more video content going to be added on this kind of stuff as we go into the new year now, and it'll be dealt with in classes. For those of you who aren't on the weekly classes, there's a paper 1 class every Monday where I break this stuff down really, really carefully, and then there's a paper 2 class every Wednesday where I kind of look at different aspects of poetry, comparative and single text. So just that's so you're aware. Okay, now let's have a look at a personal essay title from 2024. In 2024, there were 2 titles. The first one was write a personal essay in which you reflect on some of the aspects of life you find puzzling. Now, when I read that last year, I went, oh, please God, let them pick that. It's a lovely question. Why was it? Well, first of all, it contained that word that every personal essay question will contain. It contained that instruction, reflect. So if you don't know what reflect means, if you don't know what that means, then you're not going to write an effective personal essay. A personal essay has to be reflective. Now, I want to read you a quote from I read a lot. It causes a bit of trouble in my life, but I read a lot. And one of the writers that blew my tiny mind when I was kind of your age is a fellow called Charles Bukowski. Now, I will not recommend reading his work. He's dealt with kind of difficult things, and he's not always the most pleasant person, but oh my God, could he write. And he wrote this. I'm just going to read this to you really quickly, okay? We're all going to die. All of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing. Now, when you read that, he's being reflective. He's thinking about the nature of life and of mortality. And he's reflecting on how it makes the way we conduct our lives ridiculous. He's saying we spend our lives afraid, obsessed with things that don't matter, eaten up by things of no value, when really what we should focus on is that reality that life is short. So he's writing reflectively there on mortality, and he's doing it in a colourful and interesting way. He's not just saying, well, life is short and the average person will have a lifespan of 75 to 78 years old. And the fact that we don't focus on life being short and we become obsessed with trivial matters, that, you know. So often, it's not what you're saying. And this is where I'm going to get myself in trouble, because you're going to go, well, Paul, how do I get better at that? Imagination. Often it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it that can really make an essay. Now, you can do very well in personal essay and get into the 70s, but if you want to push up into the high 70s, into the 80s, and maybe even for the 90s, there has to be that sense of originality. And often that's not in what you're saying, it's how you're saying it, it's in the language. So what you have to know is that a really good personal essay is always reflective and it's colourful. When I'm looking at a marking scheme, when I'm looking at a personal essay, the student has to understand the genre. I want an original voice. I want original ideas, and I want a distinctive voice. In other words, I want to feel as if the candidate is telling me the truth. I want to feel as if the candidate is talking to me directly and honestly. If I feel the candidate is trying to spoof me, or is writing in generalities, or is trying to manipulate me, or by being overly emotional, well, straight away, I'm not going to have any issue with that particular candidate, but I'm just not going to think that the writing has any real sense of authenticity. And if the writing doesn't have a real sense of authenticity, well, then it's not going to be a very good personal essay. Now, so again, I'm just trying to throw ideas out there. I want you to argue with me. My classroom, on the wall in my classroom, and some of you have been in my classroom, and the wall in my classroom, I have loads of kind of things like, where is it now? Sorry, I'm going a bit mad now. Things like this, see that there? Right? It reads, Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars. You might recognize the reference, or there was a book and a movie, The Fault in Our Stars, that was referenced from that quote from William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. I've got loads of those things on the wall in my class, printed out A4 pages with great quotes and ideas. And one of the things I have written is FOSS, which stands for fear of sounding stupid. And I've got that FOSS in big letters, and I've got a big X through it. And the message is to my students, don't start a question by saying, I know this is a stupid question, so but. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Ask the question. And take the same approach when you're writing your compositions. Be imaginative. Now, you have to be on task. You have to be on the specifics of the question. In this particular case, it's aspects of life that you find puzzling. But if you can do it in a way which is striking and original and interesting, if you can be really honest and detailed, well, then I'm kind of drawn in then. So don't write with the brakes on. Write with an energy, with a bit of intensity, with a bit of directness and lots of imagination. And that's where students can lift their grades here. Again, don't forget the average score in the composition. It's almost the same year on year. It's not because there is a curve, but it naturally occurs. I've been correcting Leaving Cert students' work, as I said, since 1997, and you see the same patterns for some reason over and over again. Every year there's slight variations, but the vast majority of students struggle to get above 70 here, and they do because of a number of factors, but number one factor is they don't write with originality. So I'm going to try and talk about what that means in the next... I haven't got a huge amount of time left. Now, okay, so I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that this might not be the way you write a personal essay. It might not be the way your teacher writes a personal essay. It might not be the way you like to do it. Good. All I'm trying to get you to do is think for yourself. If I can do that, then I'm on a winner. Because the student who is confident in thinking for themselves and then in articulating their opinion in a way which is clear and organised and all our things we talked about earlier on in terms of structure, that student is going to have a much better chance of improving their grades in their Leaving Cert. Okay, so the marking scheme, it doesn't there might be slight little wording differences year to year. The marking scheme for last year's paper one, I'm going to not take a huge amount of time on this. By the way, this is one of the notes that you have access to, and I think it's downloadable. Sanjeev, apologies if I'm wrong for saying that. So the marking scheme, here's what it said. It said allow for a variety of approaches to the task. It said that the purpose has to be, it's a personal essay in which the candidate is reflective on things they find puzzling, and that they have to display understanding of genre. And understanding of genre means their work has to be reflective and have revealing insights, must have a confessional tone, must contain individual observation, be of course written in the first person because it's a personal essay, use personal anecdotes, and it has to be original. That's the marking scheme. And don't forget the marking scheme for purpose. And purpose is key because P is the bar. So if I'm reading a personal essay, of course it has to be on the specifics of that particular question. So this aspects of life I find puzzling. But I'm reading, I'm going, okay, it has to be about puzzling, but it has to be reflective. Has to be confessional, which means honest and feel like the person is telling me the truth and being authentic. Has to be filled with little details, little individual observation details that make the piece specific and authentic and believable and realistic. There should be little anecdotes in it, little stories that you tell to support the points that you're making. And then there has to be something in the essay which sparks. It's a personal essay. There's got to be a sense of the person who's writing it. And if they write in a very bland way, if they write in a very generic way, in a way which is filled with generalizations and cliched statements, you're going, okay, look, I'm not going to fail you, but you're not in the top drawer. So I'm going to reflect that in the way I mark your paper. Okay? So I think that's important. Yeah. And then, of course, don't forget, I keep on saying this, the P mark will impact upon the subsequent grade. So, for example, if I give you a P mark of, let's say, out of 30, if I give you, if I think you've done quite well, and I give you a P mark of 24, then you're going to get a high H3 and low H2. If I think that your work was really reflective, was confessional, felt authentic throughout, loads of little details I liked, maintained the first person throughout, filled it with like little colourful anecdotes which made it more interesting, but there wasn't that real sense of originality and freshness. There was nothing about what this writer was saying or how the writer wrote that really made me go, wow, that was really good. That's maybe where I'm going to say it's 24 rather than 27 or 28. Okay, so individual observation. Sorry, then I'll go coherence of delivery. It was a bit short, maybe. The opening needed a bit of work. It wasn't, you could tell that the student had an idea, but maybe hadn't practiced writing these essays enough. So I'm going to give it 22 out of 30. Don't forget the examiner is not allowed, even if your teacher does this, the examiner is not allowed to deduct more than 4 marks off your C and L mark from your P. Okay, so if you get 24 for purpose, you can't get 18 for coherence. The lowest score you can get for coherence will be 20. And an examiner might say to the supervising examiner who pulls them up on that, well, I didn't think the coherence was great, but I thought the purpose was great. And the supervising examiner would say, these things are all linked together. So if you think the coherence was so weak, well, then you need to bring that purpose mark down a bit. Or if you think the purpose mark was so good, well, then you're being a bit too harsh in your coherence. So that's a really good little protection for students that I think sometimes teachers don't necessarily always apply. And again, the language might be clear and controlled, no problems with it, but nothing exceptional. So there's nothing wrong with giving it 23. And maybe they made a number of spelling errors. Maybe they made 8 spelling or 7 spelling errors, and there was lots of random capitalization. How many marks can I deduct for mechanics for 8 spelling errors? I can deduct 2 marks, so they get 8 out of 10, because you have to make 4 separate and distinct errors to lose 1 mechanics mark. And that's when your overall score then becomes 20, 40, 68, 73, 77, H3. Good, strong H3 grade. So that's how it works, okay? That's how the marking works. So let's have a look at this little breakdown of what is important in a personal essay. So at the core is a reflective tone. So that's really, really important. What does that mean, Paul? Well, it must be a sense of lessons learned, or of somebody looking back on the past and developing a mature understanding of whatever it is they're talking about. So that's usually built into the question. So it has to be, because these are the things I find puzzling, and this is why I find them puzzling, and this is how it affects me. That's what reflective is. Personal essay writing is related to argumentative writing. You take a stance, like, for example, here, factors which feed my imagination. In the particular question we're looking at is, there are aspects of life which puzzle me. That's a statement. Now, if you're going to make a statement like that, you have to substantiate that statement with evidence. In other words, you have to give examples. And that's where the anecdotes referred to, the anecdotes referred to in the marking scheme become really, really, really important, okay? Really important that you get a grip on that. That you're not telling stories for the sake of it. You're telling these little stories. So if you're doing this question on factors which feed my imagination, and I have a sample answer on that, I have sample answers on loads of these, I'll throw them up on the platform. You might talk about how when you were a kid, you read, just thinking about my own kids, you read the Rick Riordan books, the Percy Jackson books, and you could write a paragraph on how reading those books, taught you the love of reading, brought you to different worlds, but also made you think about the similarity of human experience. There's loads of things you can play with there. But then when you got to 14, like my young fella, he was in there glued to fucking Fortshite or whatever he's playing at the moment. You can talk about how, like, when, you go through different stages in your life and different things feed your imagination. So my point is that you tell a story, you talk about, what it was like being 14 and being getting lost in this world of gaming that really kind of captured you and drew your attention. And that could be really compelling and really, really interesting, as long as you put loads of detail in and make it feel really believable and realistic. The marking scheme refers to individual observation. What does that mean? It means that it has to feel like you, and it has to feel, if your work just feels, if you talk about everybody and we all, and there's nothing, I'll give you a good example of that. Sorry, am I rambling now? I'm just visualizing it all. A couple of years ago, there was a personal essay title, now it'll come to me, but it was about valuable possessions or objects which meant something to you, right? Now, that year, guess what loads of people wrote about? They wrote about their mobile phone. So that's predictable. But the way a student writes about it could be really interesting. And I remember that year there was a student who wrote about how they used an app on their phone to manage a health condition that they had. And they started talking about that condition and talking about how it developed and how it affected their life, and how this app just makes their life much easier. And if they didn't have the phone, and I think they mentioned that there was a family thing, and there was an older family member who didn't have that technology to help them. And suddenly I was going, oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. So that's what individual observation means. It doesn't mean that you have to come up with crazy ideas that are, off the, out in the galaxy of weirdness. But it means that when you write about something, that you write about it with a sense of truth. And you add those little details in that make it believable. I'm going to show you examples. Now, when I say a sense of truth, that's what confessional tone means. It means it has to feel you're being honest. Personal writing is closely related to memoir writing. And there's no doubt that the best memoirs I have read are written by people who are not afraid to be vulnerable, not afraid to write about the less attractive side of their personality. Just read Patrick Kavanagh's poetry. I mean, Patrick Kavanagh was a genius, but he was a really troubled human being. You read something like On Raglan Road, where effectively he says, I met this girl, I liked her, she didn't really like me, I became obsessive, she ran away from me, and it's her fault because she's not good enough for me. And he's writing that stuff down, and he's not painting himself in a very positive light, but it's tremendously interesting. And the way he uses language to communicate that experience is what makes the poem a brilliant poem. So you can, and don't become over. I'll give you a piece of advice. If there's something that's really upsetting, don't write about it in your Leaving Cert. Because you're already stressed that day. Okay, you're already, wound up for the exams, your first paper. I can reference examples of students in the past who start writing about something that's right at the core emotionally, and they get knocked off. So don't do that. Just write about things in a very straightforward way, in a very honest way. Now, how am I doing for time? Right, it's after 9 o'clock. I just want to go and show you a couple of examples of effective personal essay writing. Paul, yes, Billy. Paul, do I have to write an opening paragraph? No, Billy, you don't have to do that at all if you don't want to. Paul, should I write an opening paragraph? Yes, Billy, I think you should. Okay, thank you, Billy. Try and write an opening. Make sure that it's clearly on task. It contains a clear thesis. There are things in life I find puzzling, or there's a whole variety of things which feed my imagination, or there are we live in a material world and I've far too many possessions, but 3 of them are valuable to me in a way I find difficult to articulate. Whatever, that's your thesis. Follow your KISS rules for your opening paragraphs. I'm sure your teachers have talked about that, which means keep it short and simple. Don't write long openings. Keep them really short, really direct, then move on. And try to do something at the start that makes it original. Now, the last one, number 4 is the one that most people will struggle with. And I wouldn't be obsessed about that. But you really have to have 1, 2, 3, and 5. And when I say clean, I mean clean in terms of basic errors. It's the first paragraph of the most important piece of writing you're going to do in your Leaving Cert exam for English, this composition. If it's filled with basic errors, if you don't punctuate things properly, if you write sentences that go on forever, if you don't capitalize, or your spelling is all over the place, and you don't have a spelling and grammar waiver, if you do, you know that those things don't apply to you in the way they do to everybody else. You're just sending a message to me. And the message is, I don't care. Like if you were going out to meet somebody on a date, is that the way we do it these days? Right? You take a bit of time to get yourself ready. You know what I mean? Like get yourself looking good because you want to make a good first impression. The same thing when you're writing your essay. You want to make a good first impression. So make sure that your opening is tight and controlled and clean with no basic errors. I'm going to show you an opening paragraph, and I hope that you just go, that's shit, that's crap. If I did that, my teacher would say, because all I'm trying to do is get you to think. One of the most important books I've read in years is called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. Matthew Syed is a very, very talented journalist and writer. And it's that book, I read it and then I immediately read it again. And it's about how sometimes disagreements are key to creativity and to progress in all facets of life. I am not reading this for you, telling you it's the only way to do it. I'm reading it to you, telling you that if I read it, I'd be really impressed. And that's all I can talk from. That's the platform I'm trying to convey to you. Okay. I love the idea of somebody opening with a quote, particularly if they can bring in something for the next day, for the Thursday, from paper 2. Here's a quote from King Lear. I'm sure you all know it. We'll discuss that tomorrow. Let go thy hold when a great wheel runs down a hill, lest it break thy neck with following it. The fool King Lear. Now straight away, I turn the page of your booklet and always start the new section on a new page. So if I finish like my question B and one line at the top of this page, go to a new page for the next section, your composition, whatever order you're doing it in, and give each section a title. Question A, text 1. Question B, text 3. Composition, question 7. Make sure it's easy for the examiner to see what you've moved on to, okay? But if I look and then I see, I would, the only time I would say to you to write the question out is in the composition. I wouldn't bother me arse doing it anywhere else on paper 1 or paper 2. But in the composition, I do recommend you just write the question out so the examiner can see really clearly, okay, that's what you're on. And then you open with a quote. Now, if I'm reading an essay by somebody who's writing about aspects of life they find puzzling, and they open with a quote from Shakespeare, I'm going, okay, I know what they're going to write about here. Okay? But then I'm going to say, when I read it, they're going to take me by surprise. And straight away I'm going, okay, original, clever, interesting. Have a look. Let go thy hold when a great wheel runs down a hill, lest it break thy neck with following it. The fool, King Lear. In King Lear, the fool knows that his boss, his liege lord, his king, is, in essence, a fool. He can see the folly of Lear's decisions and how, blinded by ego, he edges towards destruction. And the fool knows that to remain loyal to Lear is to share his doom. However, the fool does not listen to his own advice. He does not abandon Lear, but stays loyal and tries to help the old man as he endures the storm. Why am I thinking of the fool? Sorry, I'm just going to do something here. Because his behaviour puzzles me. In fact, to me, he represents the single most puzzling aspect of my life. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do they often act in a way which is self-destructive and which defies logic and reason? Now, I'm not saying it's amazeballs. I'm saying that's very good. That's thoughtful, that's clever, that's original, that's personal, and that's relevant to the question. It's clearly relevant to the question. And the way they open, I was going, is this what you writing a King Lear essay? So the fact that I thought that I was reading it going, okay, well, what had me engaged? It wasn't boring. It wasn't formulaic. It wasn't generic. There are many things in life that puzzle me. And in this essay, I am going to discuss 4 of those things that puzzle me. And they are... Now, you still score. You'll still, you can do it like that and you'll do okay, but you won't do great. So trying to be some way original, opening with a quote maybe, or opening with an anecdote or a lyric from a song. Well, that is a quote, isn't it? Whatever. But then making sure that you bring it back to the question. Making sure that you demonstrate in your bringing it back to the question that you get the genre. Look at the personal pronouns being used. Look at the focus on the question. Look at those thoughtful questions that you show you're going to be reflecting on why people behave the way they do, why they act in a self-destructive way, why they act in a way which is illogical and unreasonable. There's clearly a reflective tone here. I'm interested now. And I want to know what else this kid has to say, or sorry, oh boy, candidate, what else this candidate, this young person has to say. They've drawn me in. So there is an art and a craft to writing interesting openings. There's a load of different ways to do it. Hopefully your teacher has given you ideas. What I'm saying to you is that in the composition, the opening does matter. So take a bit of time to think about it. Okay? Yeah. Sorry, I just want to check something here. I don't know. Am I getting a message from the boss that I have to finish up early? Perfect. No, just telling me not to worry about the questions because they have them all saved. Okay? Now, so then once you've got your opening, you've then got to write your development paragraphs. Now, again, I'd love you to read this document. I'd love you to read it. There's loads of like little pieces of writing I've taken from great books I've read over the years, which illustrate the points I'm making about effective personal writing. This is the opening. Remember I mentioned your man Charles Bukowski, the fella flattened by trivialities? This is the opening to his novel Ham on Rye. Just read this and think about what I said are the features of effective personal writing. The first thing I remember is being under something. Man was a genius. It was a table. I saw a table leg. I saw the legs of the people and a portion of the tablecloth hanging down. It was dark under there. I liked being under there. It must have been in Germany. Sorry. It must have been I must have been between 1 and 2 years old. It was 1922. I felt good under the table. Nobody seemed to know that I was there. There was sunlight upon the rug and on the legs of the people. I liked the sunlight. The legs of the people were not interesting, not like the tablecloth which hung down, not like the tablecloth, not like the sunlight. That could be the opening paragraph to an essay on aspects of life which puzzle you. You know, why that memory is so important, why it's always stayed with me. You know, what is it about me that liked being under the table, away from people? But most importantly, you've got that personal pronoun I throughout. He's opening with an anecdote, a very striking opening line designed to be engaging. The first time I remember is being under something. That line, the reason I laughed when I read it is because it's so obvious what he's doing. He's making the reader go, what do you mean under something? And as soon as I have that question, I have to read on to get the answer and I'm hooked. I'm drawn in. Then you have those reflections. It was dark. He liked the darkness. So there's a bit of imagery there, thinking about the kind of person he is. He felt good, but when nobody knew that he was there, so he liked being on his own. He didn't like being the center of attention. Highly reflective, highly imaginative, interesting, not formulaic, not predictable, but relevant. Now, so I've talked about how to open. Now I want to talk about I want to give you an example of a couple of explanatory or development paragraphs. By the way, there's that Sinead O'Connor, that book is called Rememberings. That's an extract from it, which I just think is superb, fantastic. And there are extracts from Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, which, yes, is a novel, but it's an autobiographical novel. And a couple of other texts in the piece, okay? Now, so I want to have a look at some sample paragraphs from the task. There's an error there. Apologies, I'll have to fix that. From 2024. Now, remember, what I'm saying to you is rip them apart if you like. Critical thinking is the only way to learn. So don't, as an English student, say, I went to Paul's class on Grinds 360. Paul did it like this. This is the way I have to do it. Take what I'm saying as a jumping off point, as the start of a conversation with yourself. I've got 5 months to go. if I'm going to write a personal essay, do I know what I'm doing here? I'm not a H1 student. I'm not even a H3 student, but I want to get better. And I do believe, I said this to you at the start of the class, which feels like a long time ago, but hopefully it doesn't feel to you like it was, that everybody's capable of improving by a few percentage points. And when the grade bands are 10%, it is really possible. And I've had this happen many, 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 many times, where I get emails from people who've attended Christmas courses or pre-mock preparation courses and who've just applied the processes that I've tried to outline tonight and will continue to outline tomorrow morning, and they've gone up a grade or 2 grades. Now, I've also got other people who it didn't work for them. But if you try to just apply some of these ideas and you do it seriously with practice over time, understanding that nothing worthwhile comes easy, then you will hopefully see some progress. Anyway, let's just look at a couple of samples. So remember earlier on, I mentioned the Rick rules. And they were build every paragraph or section of your essay, because you can break your paragraphs into subsections, around a relevant point, support that point with information, contextualize or do a little bit of thinking, in this case, reflecting on why that point is relevant to the question under discussion, and write as clearly as you can. Let's have a look at this paragraph and let's break it down for quality. Apologies. So here's a link through. And remember, one of the things you're being marked on in coherence of delivery is your ability to connect the different aspects of your essay together. I always think of an essay as being like a train. Sorry now for going down this route. In any good personal essay or speech or discursive essay, the candidate will generally develop somewhere between 5 and 6 points, okay, across 5 or 6 paragraphs or sections of the essay. Now, every train needs an engine. I don't know why I always do that, because we don't have steam trains anymore, but it needs an engine, right? And then each subsequent carriage will carry separate passengers or groups of passengers. And all those passengers are separate from each other. Now, for the train to be effective, they all have to be connected. Because if the engine pulls off and it's not connected, well, it's not a train. It's a mess. It's something that doesn't function properly. So every paragraph has to make a point which is separate from the point, or every section if you're breaking your paragraphs up into subsections, but every paragraph or section has to make a point which is separate from the one that precedes it or follows it, but is connected to the overall point in the question. Does that make sense? So you might write about, things that puzzle you, friendships can puzzle you, our, tendency to be ignorant and rude to each other could puzzle you. Why we have to study English in school could puzzle you. There's 1,000 things you could say. So each one contains a separate point, and each one is connected to the question. They're all about being puzzled. So separate but connected, right? Do you get the idea? So there has to be that continuity throughout, that each paragraph is containing, or each point is separate from the points before it or after it, but connected to the overall topic of the question. But then there can be other little links, continuity links, between the paragraphs as well. So you will have noticed, I'm conscious of time now, I'm really going to get myself in trouble here. You will have noticed that I ended the previous, okay, just do it this way. The opening paragraph, I ended the opening paragraph with the line, why do people behave the way they do? Why do they often act in a way which is self-destructive and which defies logic and reason? And then I begin my next paragraph with, I think, for example, of the climate crisis. So that's a link to the previous paragraph. This is my example of people behaving in a way which defies logic and reason. So it's like the sections of people, somebody asked me at the start of the class about coherence. A successful essay, it's like a relay race team. They all have their chance to hold a baton, but there has to be a moment when leg one is handing over to leg two, where they're both holding the baton for a moment before leg two takes off. And that's what the continuity links are, the little links between the paragraphs. And that's a sign of a student who's writing with a little bit of sophistication and a little bit of control. Okay. I think, for example, of the climate crisis. So now I know what this paragraph is about. It's about the climate crisis. And how are you going to link that into things that puzzle you? As a young person, I understand the science. Our planet is in crisis. The ice caps are melting. Wildfires are a permanent feature of life in many places of the world. Sea levels are rising. Increased temperatures are making large tracts of the earth uninhabitable. Now, would that suggest to you that this student knows what he's talking about or what she's talking about? In nice, easy language, they're demonstrating knowledge. So how do they link this back to puzzling? I'm interested. I know we all need to play our part in fighting the crisis, but does it stop me boarding a flight 5 times a year? If you're lucky, I know. To go on holidays or to football matches? Does it stop me from wanting to own a car as soon as I possibly can, or from owning innumerable devices? Remember I said about attention to detail, those little details that make the story or the essay pop off the page. Look at this. Phone, headphones, PS5, laptop, e-bike, and then the ellipses at the end. So those little details really making it authentic and believable. All of which require the production of energy. Of course it doesn't. And that leaves me puzzled. See? Back to the question. Why? Knowing what I know, and now what I'm doing is reflecting on my own behaviour, do I fail to act? I don't really know the answer to that question, and I am left feeling helpless. And if you're saying you're feeling helpless, you're being really honest and confessional there, and then you have this little bit of creative writing, like a man with lung cancer who can't seem to find the strength to give up the smokes. And I deliberately use smokes there because it's colloquial. I think colloquial language is, to an extent, acceptable in a good personal essay. You want to keep the language controlled. You don't want to go into using very, very, very informal language, but it's okay there in a way it wouldn't be, for example, in a speech or a discursive essay. Now that's a little simile, which adds a bit of colour. To the paragraph. Now you read that and you go, okay, this is really high. Now again, to me, you might disagree, and all I'm trying to do is get you to think. But you might read that and go, or I would read that and go, this the student is doing all the things they're meant to do. Can I remind you of what they're meant to do? They're meant to be reflective. That student is definitely reflecting on their own life, on their own behaviour. They have this knowledge of the planet in crisis, and yet they continue to do all of these things they're not meant to be doing. Very confessional. They're admitting that, they have this awareness, and yet they're so selfish that they can't change their behaviour, and that they feel kind of helpless. Okay? Individual observation. The list of objects that are owned. The reference to the trips to holidays or football matches. All that little detail, those incidental details that don't appear to be important on their own, but actually combine to create the writing more, believable, substantial, real. The use of the personal pronoun I, me, my throughout, all the way through. Personal anecdote? No personal anecdote there, but a broad picture of their life. That's okay. Not every feature has to be in every paragraph. And then originality and freshness? I definitely think so. For me, there definitely is originality and freshness. I like the simile at the end. I like the rhythm of the language. I like the structure of the paragraph, talking about the climate crisis and then bringing it to the question. Very, very, very strong. So I read that and I go, okay, I'm going to go back to the marking scheme. Yeah, the student is doing all the things they're meant to do for purpose. It definitely is on puzzling. And the paragraph has been developed in a really clear way, as if they kind of have a process for writing paragraphs, right? And they clearly do have a process for writing paragraphs. The work is sequenced. There's linking. That means linking between the paragraphs. There's, the continuity links between the paragraphs. And the language is very controlled. The language, there's no basic errors in the language. The phrasing is clear. There's a little bit of a colloquialism at the end. But other than that, and that isn't even a problem in a personal essay, other than that, it's very, very, very strong. So I'm reading it. And this is what you have to try to do. One of the most valuable things that I'm always trying to look at. Never, you don't need to know about my attitude to life, but I always think it's really important to just try and learn something new, as often as possible. And that often comes from interacting with other people. I've got this fantastic colleague, Anne-Marie, in the other school I work in the Brunner, and she was doing her master's a couple of years ago, and she did it. Part of the master's was interviewing people in the school that we work in, and about how we deal with issues with students. And she asked me about this idea of, do I ever reframe? And I was like, I hate feckin', this kind of butchery of the language. What do you mean reframe? He said, try to look at it from other people's point of view. And I said, of course I do. Now what you need to do, and because of course, if I have a student who's like normally sound, and then they come in one day and they're pure aggro at me, I can't just go, he's being pure aggro at me. You have to go, okay, what's going on with him? So this is not typical of his behaviour. So I have to take that into account when I'm dealing with him. You're writing an essay for the Leaving Cert. This is worth 25%. Get into the examiner's head. Don't try to be perfect. There is no such thing as perfect. Okay, I was up with the hurler wall with my daughter today. She's 10 years old. She loves camogie. And we're smacking balls and she's catching maybe 60, 70% of them. And she's going mad when she doesn't catch the other 30% of them. I said, what are you talking about? You won't catch everyone in the game, but when it matters, you have done the practice and you'll be able to apply. And that's what I'm saying to you as students. Get into the head of the examiner. What did we start tonight with? Besides the technical issue, we started tonight with the marking scheme. Understand what the examiner is looking for in your work. Understand the qualities of, if you want to write a personal essay, good personal writing. If you're analysing a piece of narrative writing, If you're doing a newspaper article, what should be in a newspaper article? That's paper one. And I think that's probably a very good place to finish. Now, as I said, look, we're only brushing off the edges of things here. That's a 3-hour class now. I'm just finished now, okay? That's a 3-hour class, and I'd love to know how many of you actually stayed with me for the 3 hours, but I hope you found it in some way useful. But you can see there an insight into the way an examiner looks at a paper and the type of things that students who are going to improve by those few percentage points that can lift their score, the type of things that they're going to do in the next 5 months, those are the type of things that you can do. Now, I'm going to say to Tracy, first of all, thank you for staying with me so late, Tracy. If you could open the chat just for another 5 minutes, and what we'll do then is we can save that, whatever questions come in based on that, and then we can, I'll deal with them later on the week. Don't forget, guys, tomorrow morning, 9:30, I'll be here. Now, I'm not sure. I'm sure you'll get an email from the guys in the office about whether or not how you're going to come into the class, whether it'll be the same way as you ended up having it tonight because of the volume of traffic. But tomorrow morning at 9:30, I'm going to talk about King Lear for an hour. I'm going to talk about studied poetry. I'm going to talk about the comparative. And then at the end, for those few people who are looking at, because there has been a request, who are looking at the Crucible, I want to have a little chat about that towards the end as well. So I hope you found tonight of use. I'm so grateful to you for attending. I really, really, really am. And sure, lash the questions in there and we'll deal with that at a later date. So thanks very much, folks. Good night. And without annoying any of you, Liverpool also won 5-0 tonight. So it's what we call a happy day. I'll see you in the morning. Cheers and goodbye.